Hello everyone, Heather here with my very first live webinar here with astrolotta.com, and I'm very excited about this webinar because we're going to be talking about inconjunct aspects, and this is something that I feel is very important in the chart that's often overlooked. There's not a lot of really good information out there about inconjunct aspects. The information that you can find that's available over the internet and through other sources is not necessarily wrong, but it is pretty vague and it's hard to use when you're either reading a chart for somebody or when you're trying to discover things in your own chart, right? Because it's very vague and it can sort of apply to anyone almost. And so what I have done over the past few years is I have been studying inconjunct aspects, and I've been doing this because I myself have 7 inconjunct aspects in my birth chart, and I was wondering what that was all about. I wasn't getting a lot of good information, and so I had to dig a little deeper, search a little harder, and come to some conclusions myself as well. So this is going to be a synthesis of information that I have found from different teachers, from different resources, from different books, and also through my own experience in working with hundreds of clients all over the world. And so you're going to get some real life examples, some real life stories. And so hopefully you'll find this very helpful in your own life, in your own chart. And also if you are a student of astrology or a professional astrologer, hopefully you can utilize this information in working with clients. So let's see. Okay, so we do have some people in here. Hi, Simone. I'm gonna just kind of give you guys a brief introduction while we wait, because there should be a few more people showing up in the chat and in the webinar. So I want to make sure that everybody gets to, get to the meat of the content. But so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather. I'm an astrologer here on astrolotta.com. I've been studying astrology for about 7 years, and I've been a practicing astrologer for the past few years. And and so I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and that's also part of the reason why these inconjunct aspects are so interesting to me, because they represent deep psychological patterns in the birth chart that can be very difficult to understand and uncover. It's like we know that they're there, but we don't realize what an issue they're causing until we start to look at it and we start to examine it and we start to work through these issues. And also these represent hidden talents, hidden gifts that are given to us through our birth chart. Once we are able to deal with the energy and the psychological patterns and the past trauma that sometimes comes along with these patterns, once we're able to work through it, we're able to utilize the energy very positively. And so a lot of these things become our greatest talents and our greatest gifts, especially when it comes to the yod, which we'll get into. So we're going to be covering a lot of information today. We're going to be going through all the different planets in inconjunct aspects. We're going to be going through different planetary combinations. I'll be going through a lot of different examples. We'll go through the midheaven, the IC, the ascendant, the descendant, the north and south node, all in inconjunct aspects. And I'll be talking about how they show up in different signs, in different houses, in different placements, and in different combinations. So we'll be covering a lot of information. And we'll also be doing yods, of course, and talking about how the yod shows up and how to utilize that energy as well. And also how these inconjunct aspects are activated by transit, and also how they can, in general, just transits in the sky as inconjuncts we'll go over very briefly. And so, yeah, I'm excited to get into this information. And so if you have questions along the way, feel free to ask them as you go through and as they come up in your mind, because I do have Carlene, one of the psychics here on astrolotta.com, monitoring the chat room for us. So she'll be sending me, any really interesting questions. So that way when we do stop for Q&A, I can get to all of your questions. So feel free to, just shoot them along the way for those of you who are watching live. All right, guys. Nice. Okay, and so before we get into this, I do want to, before we get into like the actual bulk of everything, I just want to make an announcement for all of you that are attending the webinar live or watching it in the recording version. I am doing a promo. If you book a reading with me within 10 days of purchasing this webinar, you'll receive 10 minutes free on a 30 or 60-minute reading, or you can get a free single question reading if you book a 90-minute reading with me. So if you do decide that you want a reading after attending this webinar, you can get a little bit of some extra goodies. So just forward me your confirmation that you attended the webinar, and I'll make sure to hook it up for you. You guys will get an extra long reading to get all of your questions about your inconjunct aspects and anything else you want to get answered, or you can get a single question reading with a 90-minute reading that you can utilize at any time that you decide. So it won't expire. I'll just keep a little list. So yeah, anyway, so I'm going to just kind of jump right into this. And so for some of you who know me, you know that I am a Virgo, so there is going to be a PowerPoint, and I apologize for those of you that are not into the whole PowerPoint thing, but it'll make it a little easier to keep us on track, to organize the information, and so that way you guys can take notes if you want to. I'm not going to read directly off of it or anything like that, but it is going to give us the bullet points of what we're going over, and I have all my examples in order and all of that, so we'll get into that now. So let me load everything. Okay. And if I'm going too fast, let me know also, and hopefully Carlene will tell me via text message. Let me load this up. Okay. Oop. All right. So I'm gonna double check. Hopefully that's what you're seeing. Okay. Sorry guys, I'm just trying to load the slides and make sure it's working right. Okay, cool. So when I looked at that, it looked like it was right. Okay, so this webinar is going to be all about inconjunct aspects. And so I'm going to dive right into it since we already did our introductions. And I'll jump back between this screen and my face from time to time so you won't just be looking at words on a computer screen for the entire webinar. Okay, so, there we go. So I just wanted to give props where props are due. These are a lot of my resources for the information, where the sort of the seeds of this information came from. A really awesome book for additional reading for those of you who are interested in learning more and going deep and having a really nice reference guide for the inconjunct aspects is The Psychodynamics of Inconjunctions by Alan Epstein. And this is a really, really great book. It goes really in depth. A lot of the information that I'm going to be sharing, especially when it comes to the early childhood representations of the inconjunct aspect and the patterns that were developed from that, that's going to be coming from Alan Epstein's work primarily. Also, my teacher Lynn Coiner has done a lot of work and research on inconjunctions because she is a medical astrologer, and these do have medical applications because they again represent deep psychological issues that are very difficult to work through and that we hold on to, and that can eventually lead to illness. So Lynn Coiner's work, I'll be referencing a couple of her articles, and I'll put the links, on the slides so you'll be able to see. And then obviously Robert Phoenix is one of my teachers. His 11th House Academy goes into minor aspects, so you can get a sort of general overview of it. And his interpretation is pretty good as well, but it doesn't go quite in as much depth as obviously Lynn Coiner's work and Alan Epstein's book does. So that's another reference, and it's also a really great astrology course because I know a lot of you guys are students of astrology yourselves. This is a really great value, really great course to get into if you want to learn the basics. Okay, so what are inconjunct aspects? Well, they are 150-degree minor aspects. So they're considered minor aspects, but I don't consider them to be minor because they have such deep implications in the birth chart. Really, if you have a lot of inconjunct aspects in your birth chart, these become the key to understanding your chart and the key to understanding yourself on a deep and profound level. These are not just surface level sort of predictive aspects or anything like that. They're not, sometimes they can show up in ways that are tangible, but really it's about going deeper, right? So this is really a webinar and a technique to learn if you really want to know yourself on a deeper level, if you want to know your psychology, if you want to know your pitfalls, your challenges, the things that run kind of deep, and work through that energy, right? To create talents, to create gifts, to utilize it in a way that's positive, to transform it into something greater, right? That's what this is about. So it's about taking these patterns, looking at them, shining a light on them, and then learning how to transform that energy to work with it, to make the appropriate adjustments that are needed, and to let go of the things that we can't really control, and to work through these energies. And so these are 150-degree minor aspects. The other aspect that I'm going to talk about a little bit is called the semi-sextile, and that is actually a 30-degree aspect. It's like the It's kind of like when you look at a trine versus a sextile. So it's a similar energy, but it needs to be activated in order to be utilized, and it's not as intense of an influence. So some people consider semi-sextiles to be the same as inconjuncts. To a certain extent, yeah, they have a similar sort of energy, but they're not the same. They're not going to be as intense. They're not going to show up as predominantly as the 150-degree minor aspects of the inconjunct, which I'm going to show you how to find these all in your chart. But they are going to play a role, especially when you have inconjuncts to the different axes in your chart. So the ascendant and descendant, the midheaven, and the IC, or even the north and south node, then the semi-sextile is going to play a role because you're talking about an axis. Also, if you have an inconjunct aspect to a planet that is in opposition to another planet, right? Because then we're also talking about the integration of two opposing energies. And so that's when this semi-sextile, the 30-degree aspect, is going to show up a little bit more predominantly, and it's going to be more important to look at. But in general, we're talking about the 150-degree inconjunct aspect, not the semi-sextile. You can take this and apply it to the semi-sextile if that's something that you wish to do, but it's, again, not going to have the same weight. And so what is an inconjunct aspect overall? Or quincunx is the other name for it. That's why I put that up there. I like to call it inconjunct because I have a difficult time saying quincunx for some reason. I get like my words jumbled, but inconjunct, quincunx, whatever you want to call it. So it's two planets that by placement have absolutely nothing in common in the birth chart. So the planets themselves might have something in common, like if you have an inconjunct between Mars and Pluto, which are both the rulers of Scorpio, right? Those have similar energies because Pluto is considered to be the higher octave of Mars. But so in general, though, they have nothing in common by their placement. And so that means they're in two signs in two houses that are a different element, right? Earth, air, fire, or water. They're a different modality. They're, cardinal, mutable, fixed, or what's the other one? Cardinal, mutable, fixed. Oh my goodness, my brain is blanking right now, but the four different modalities, or is it three modalities? Maybe that's why I just got confused. Anyway, by modality, they're different as well. And then the polarity too, male, female, right? And they're not in opposition to one another. So the energies are contradictory. They don't work together. They're sort of enigmatic, like you want them to work together, but you can't quite get it to happen. So it's essentially, the way that Lynn Koiner explained it is that these two aspects are, or these two planets and these two energies are different energies that somehow in our life and in our experience, we were taught that they go together, even though they don't. So we're trying to force them to work together, right? And so the way that she explained it was something about like a lamp or a stuffed animal or something, but I like to explain it by my husband's cooking because it's kind of like the way that he sometimes cooks. He likes to put really weird spices and things that don't make sense. So he'll like make a burrito and put a bunch of cinnamon in it. And for some reason he thinks in his head, or he learned through experience, that this is a good idea and that this would work together, right? But when you go to eat the burrito, it does not taste good at all. And he likes to call it a complex flavor, but it's really just kind of gross. So it doesn't work together, but you keep doing it over and over again anyway, even though you learn, hey, I made this burrito like 10 times, I keep putting cinnamon in it and it doesn't taste good, but this time I think it's going to taste good, right? So you have to learn to let go of this idea that these two energies work together, and that requires compromise because you can't have it all, right? You can't have the cinnamon burrito and have it taste good. That's just not going to be a thing. And so you have to let go of certain ideas about these energies and about these aspects in order to come to a point of compromise so the energies can work better together and also separately, right? Because they're not always going to be working together, but they do to a certain extent. But again, it requires compromise. It requires letting go of different patterns of behavior that you're really stuck on. And a lot of times you're aware that it's not working, but you just keep doing it anyway. And so that's a lot of what the inconjunct energy represents. And so they represent indirect problems, right? Because they're related indirectly, these two planetary energies in your birth chart. And so they require indirect solutions. And so an example of that would be if you have a Mercury inconjunct. A Mercury inconjunct indicates problems with being misunderstood or not being able to communicate effectively. You think that you're communicating effectively, you have these really great ideas, and you feel like you're explaining them really well, but for whatever reason, it's just not working. People are not getting it. And so with the Mercury inconjunct, you have to learn to communicate indirectly, right? So through visuals, through story, through allegory, through humor, through, a less blunt way of communicating and a less direct way of communicating your thoughts and your ideas. And it's going to be more easily understood and accepted if you're able to do that, right? So that's just one of many, many examples that we're going to get into with the sort of indirect solutions and the indirect energy that you need to utilize in order to work with this. Because really, if you have Mercury in an inconjunct, just to use this as an example again, this is going to indicate a talent for communicating really new ideas, communicating things that are a little bit deeper. It depends on where it's placed in your chart, but there is a talent for communication, for writing, for helping people to understand things that they normally wouldn't look at, right? And if you're communicating too bluntly, then people are going to be a little taken aback by it, right? Or if you're communicating in a way that's confusing, people are going to be a little taken aback by it. So again, it's about, communicating indirectly, and then that's how you can utilize your talent for communication and for sort of conveying information to other people. The other main thing that goes on with the inconjunct aspects is that the energy is either repressed, so you sort of hold it in and you don't utilize it, or it's overexpressed. And sometimes you can vacillate between the two. So during some periods of your life or in certain contexts, the energy will be overexpressed and it'll be excessive. And then in other situations, other periods in your life, you'll hold it in, you'll repress that energy. And so an example of this could be if you have a moon inconjunct, because the moon represents our emotions. And so if you have a lunar inconjunct, you have a tendency to either hold in your emotions and bottle them up, or to overexpress them. And a lot of times you can hold them in, hold them in, hold them in, and then at some point they just explode out of you sort of at a random period of time when it's just not appropriate to be expressing those emotions, or the context isn't right. So you have to learn to express this energy in a way that is more consistent, where you're not bottling it up and you're not overexpressing it. It's about, coming to a point, not necessarily of balance, but again, of compromise. And so the other end of that planetary energy, because there are two planets involved in the inconjunct, when one's being repressed, the other one is often overexpressed, and vice versa. Excuse me. So that's a little bit about, what's going on. And so it shows deeply held psychological patterns, challenges. Childhood struggles too are a big thing that we're going to get into, because a lot of these patterns stem from early childhood experience. And so getting into that and understanding how these things developed in the first place can help us to work through that energy a little bit better, right? Because we realize, hey, this isn't actually how it works. This is just the example that was set by my parents, or this is my experience in childhood, and this is how I learned to deal with it as sort of a defense mechanism, right? And so when we learn, again, to work with this energy and to express it appropriately, when this energy becomes more refined, usually in adulthood, in our later years after we've done a lot of inner work, our hidden talents and our hidden gifts can come out. And even when we do have these gifts and other people see it, that's the other thing with these inconjunct aspects. We don't necessarily believe that we can do these things because it's been so ingrained in us, right? That it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Because through our experience, we've seen that. But once you learn to utilize the energy indirectly, it does work. And so people will, like, again, the Mercury inconjunct aspect, I'll tell people that they have a gift for communication, but they have to communicate indirectly, or they could write or something. Usually they don't believe me unless they're really, really in tune with their own energy, their own psychology, and they've been doing the work and they understand this, right? And a lot of times they feel compelled to write or to communicate or to teach or something along those lines, but they just feel like they're not good enough, they're not intelligent enough because they've been ridiculed in the past. So, these are experiences, again, they stem from the early childhood, and even when the gifts and talents start to come out, we don't always believe in them right away. We have to sort of get used to being able to utilize that energy and being accepted in this way. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next one. All right, so I'm going to get into the Jones charts types, because this is going to show you where you're most likely to find the inconjunct aspects in the birth chart. So if you can just look at the pattern of a chart, look what the chart looks like, you're going to be able to see these different patterns show up in the charts, and different patterns tend to have more inconjunct aspects. The ones that you're going to find the most inconjunctions are going to be the splash charts. So a splash chart is usually when there's just one or maybe two planets in a couple houses, but it's really just one planet in a bunch of different houses, just like you see right here. And so this makes it way more likely, because this planet here is going to be inconjunct this planet over here, which will be inconjunct that, it's going to be like a lot of different inconjunctions, potentially yods. Another one that is common is sometimes a splay chart, not if it's a true splay chart, because as you can see the way it's divided here, that's, well, I guess you could have, this would be an inconjunction in the splay chart right here. So the splay chart is commonly one or two inconjunctions can show up. The locomotive, which is this one right here, that you'll very commonly find inconjunctions as well. The bundle, if it's again a true bundle, you're probably not going to find a lot of inconjunctions. But sometimes no chart is perfect in any of these formations. The seesaw is also another one where you can find inconjunct aspects. The bucket also. So all these ones that I put on here are essentially, you're going to be able to find them for the most part. The bull, probably not. The bucket, if it is an inconjunct aspect, it's only going to be if it's an inconjunction to the singleton in the chart, which is this little lonely planet out here. And that's going to take on an extra level of importance, because the singleton in a bucket chart, it is an energy that can already become repressed, that you really need to utilize in order to maintain your health, your sanity, and your well-being. And so this energy already takes on a really great importance, where you really need to be utilizing it. And it shows like a certain strength, but it's sort of leading the chart, right? So you need to be utilizing the energy of the singleton in the bucket chart anyway. But when you have it in an inconjunction with another planet, it can make it so it's difficult to utilize, or it's more repressed. Or again, it could be overexpressed, but usually with the bucket, it's a little bit repressed. And so, yeah, these are the Jones charts types. And so hopefully that was good to help you sort of eyeball things. So a lot of you in this webinar are probably going to have one of these charts. Okay. So how to find inconjunctions in the birth chart. First and foremost, this is the symbol for the inconjunction. So if you're looking at an aspect grid, which is this thing down here, I'll have a bigger one next to show you what that looks like. This is what the inconjunction is going to look like in the aspect grid. And the semisextile is actually this, but upside down. So the semisextile, again, it works a little bit differently, but you can look at that as well, especially when you're looking at the midheaven, IC, ascendant, descendant, north and south nodes, or planets that are in opposition. That's going to, again, take on a little bit of a more faded importance. The circular charts are the best way to do this. Because you can see it a little bit more easily. It's going to, not be in opposition, but the planet will be in the next sign over. And it has to be within a 2 to 3 degree orb. Anything bigger than that becomes a different kind of aspect. It's like a tri-semi something. I don't know. It's like a crazy minor aspect that is different from the inconjunction. I only really use inconjunctions and semisextiles, so we're not going to get into this, all the other different variations of this. But so between 2 and 3 degrees orb, so between, what would that be, 147 to 153 degrees, that's going to be the range that you're going to be looking for the inconjunctions. And for the semisextile, it's a similar thing as well, but 30 degrees, so it'd be 27 to 33. And so when you look at a chart that you pull up from astro.com, which is my preferred way to do it and my preferred way to tell people to do it, because you can see it quite easily. It's free. You can pull up your chart. A lot of you guys asked me for your charts or asked me for a list of your inconjunctions prior to this webinar. And if you're watching this as on the pre-recording and you want me to list off your inconjunctions for you, just to double check and make sure that they're correct, you can always send me a message through my reader page on astrolotta.com, and I'd be happy to do that for you. So this dotted green line right here, that is the inconjunct aspect. So you see this right here, this is actually a yod because it forms this triangle, and the point is right here at Pluto. So Pluto's the apex of the yod, and then you have a sextile right here. So if you have a sextile with two inconjunctions pointed at one planet that is at the apex, that is called a yod, and it's also known as the finger of God. And this is actually MC Hammer's chart. I'm probably not going to use his as an example very often, but it's just a very distinct, very obvious pattern that's going on here that you can see, and it's very tight as well. These two are both at 9 degrees. I think this one is like at like 856, so this is a very tight yod. So again, you only go between 2 to 3 degrees. If it's beyond that, the energy starts to change. It's not as strong, and it's really not a yod. Let's see. Okay, and so this is the aspect grid for MC Hammer, and I can't make this bigger actually, oh no. But when you look at the aspect grid, if you can see it big in your own grid, which you can pull this up again through astro.com, it's just extended chart selection, and then you click on additional tables, PDF. Once you pull up your chart, and you will get an aspect grid like this. They also have one at the bottom of the chart if you go back, which I'm not sure how to go back right now. But anyway, so you'll see right here, Pluto, he has an inconjunction right here with the sun. He has an inconjunction with, let's see what else he has. He had a couple different inconjunctions, but I can't see it because it's really small. But anyway, that symbol that I showed you is what's going to show up in the aspect grid. And then these numbers here are showing you the degree of the orb. So again, anything beyond 3 degrees is not going to be an inconjunction. All right, guys, and so because this webinar is for everyone and not just professional astrologers, I want to just go over a basic rundown and a basic interpretation of the energy of these inconjunct aspects by planet, because some of you might not be completely familiar with the planetary energies, and then we'll start getting into the juicy stuff. In terms of the sun in astrology represents your identity. It's not just your identity out in the world, but it's really your true identity at your core. It's the soul's expression of purpose in the physical reality. So it represents your purpose or your role in life that you play. It represents leadership, success, physical creative energy, creative potential. It's that vital life force energy that keeps you optimistic and keeps things going. And it's also representative of the father early on in life, the son. Sometimes it could be the mother, sometimes it could be another authority figure, especially in this day and age, but traditionally the son is the father. This also represents other people in positions of authority over you and your relationship with authority figures. All of these different things can be sort of seen in the sun, but ultimately it's the soul's expression of purpose in the physical reality. And so when you have an inconjunction to the sun, there is issues in a dysfunction with finding your purpose or finding your role in life, where you might take on roles that are not necessarily who you are and true to your nature. And so you can be overexpressing a certain role and neglecting other energies in your birth chart, and also neglecting who you are truly on the inside, because you learn to take on this role to please the authority figures, right? The son, a lot of times it has to do with the father, but to please these authority figures in your early childhood experience, you take on these roles. The moon is representative of your subjective reality, right? It's your subjective perception of all of your experiences, right? So it's the way that you take in information subjectively. And so it rules your emotions and your experience with your emotions. It rules your intuition. Your internal sense of satisfaction comes from the moon as well. Also your sense of safety, security, comfort. It shows what you need in order to feel safe, secure, and comfortable as well. It also represents the relationship with the maternal figure or the more nurturing figure in your early childhood experience. Not always the mother. Sometimes this is the father. I'll describe the moon to certain people and they'll be like, oh my gosh, yeah, no, that's my dad, right? Because in this day and age, again, a lot of times the father takes on the more nurturing role. Maybe he's the more nurturing presence. Maybe he's just a more nurturing guy in general, right? Sometimes it's just that way. Also, it could be a grandmother or whoever it is that raised you that was the more nurturing maternal figure. So as we get into this, that'll be important to keep in mind, because sometimes the moon is not going to represent your mother. With Mercury, and again, the moon is, it could be overexpression and underexpression of your emotions. It can be either repressing your intuition and not following it, or relying too heavily on intuition instead of looking at things realistically. It just kind of depends on what's going on. So we will get into that. Okay, so Mercury rules your intelligence, it's your communication, it's your decision making, it's the intellectual, analytical mind. And so when you have an inconjunction to Mercury, people either tend to over express, so they tend to over explain themselves, over explain their ideas, over explain their thought processes. They also tend to speak really bluntly. That's a lot of times the thing with Mercury, or they keep silent, they keep quiet, right? And so that's part of the Mercury inconjunction. Venus rules relationships, love and affection, pleasure. It's your self-esteem, your self-worth. It's your self-love. It's also your experience with materialism and engaging in material pleasures. And so, Venus inconjunctions can indicate, especially they indicate self-worth issues and feeling unlovable. They also indicate, over concern with the appearance or under concern with the appearance. They indicate dysfunctional relationships, all of these different types of things. Mars indicates action and will. So Mars represents your willpower, your strength of will. It's also the anger and the aggression that you hold in and that you experience and that you express. It's also tension, and it can be sexual tension as well and sexual expression. Mars rules our sexual style. So the sort of the sign that Mars is in shows us what we like and what we want to sort of engage with in terms of sexual energy. And so, this could be a dysregulation of anger, aggression, action, will, and also sexual expression where these things are either overexpressed or they're held in and repressed. Jupiter is expansion, optimism, personal growth, it's faith, it's philosophy, it's how you find not meaning and purpose through your role or through whatever it is that you're doing, but meaning and purpose in a broader sense. So it's finding meaning and purpose through religion, spiritual seeking, higher learning, adventure, expanding the mind through experience. Those types of things are represented by Jupiter. It rules Sagittarius, so it's a lot of that Sagittarian sort of energy. And then Saturn. So Saturn is, and going back to Jupiter, because Jupiter is our optimism, it also rules generosity and things like that too. So a lot of times people who have Jupiter in conjunctions, they can be a little over generous. They have trouble saying no. They have a need to impress people because Jupiter is very big, expansive, impressive, or they're self-depreciating because they feel overrated. And so that's some of the stuff with the Jupiter in conjunction. We're obviously going to get in much deeper, but I just want to give you guys a general overview so you understand the energy of these planets and what they actually represent in the birth chart. So Saturn represents responsibility, structure. It's hard lessons. It's our experiences with authority, right? Saturn is the teacher. It brings things that are difficult. It also brings boundary issues, and it brings up issues surrounding the structure in our lives and the responsibilities that we've taken on. And so a lot of times with Saturn, people tend to take on too much of the burden of responsibility for other people and for their burdens, for their energy, for whatever it is that they need help with, and they tend to neglect their own responsibilities as a result of that because they're taking on too much. Uranus represents rebellion, independence, change, disruption. It's innovation, it's inspiration, it's electricity. And so, Uranus in conjunction people can be geniuses, right? And when you have Uranus in an in conjunction, it's going to be much stronger if you are, if it's in an in conjunction with one of your personal planets, right? If it's with an outer planet, this is going to be more of a generational aspect. You can still read for it if you want, but it's not going to be felt very intensely. So you're going to want Uranus in an in conjunction with, the Sun through Saturn. So this indicates a disruption in, independence, rebellion, change, those types of energies where people will either bottle in their rebellious nature or they'll express it inappropriately. A lot of times it goes between the two where you're holding it in and then expressing it all at once. But these people have a hidden genius. So that's, a talent that we'll get into and we'll describe a little bit more deeply as we get into the planet. All right, so Neptune, spirituality, fantasy, illusion, delusion, mysticism, escapism. It's this rose-colored glasses. It's this idealism, right? Neptune represents compassion and love to the extent where you can't see anything else. And so it dissolves boundaries. It dissolves our our perceptions of reality, and it makes things a little bit foggy, a little bit confusing, and a little less structured. And so when you have Neptune in conjunction, you can be prone to escapism, to fantasy especially. A lot of times these people are daydreamers. You can be prone to, especially if it's in conjunction with Venus or your descendant or something along those lines, you can be prone to seeing other people through the lens of rose-colored glasses. So you want to see them through this lens of love and compassion, but you can't quite see them clearly. So they end up, deceiving deceiving you, or it isn't quite what you thought it was going to be. Also, it brings up boundary issues, of course, because that's the nature of Neptune. Different than Saturn, but still boundary issues. And so Pluto is power, control, certainty. It's research, it's obsession, it's really focused energy. It can be sex, passion, transformation. It rules the processes of elimination in terms of like our physical processes of elimination, but also mental, psychological, emotional, and spiritual elimination. It's really intense psychic energy too. A lot of you are going to have Pluto in conjunctions, because Pluto in conjunction people, they have a fear or a discomfort with uncertainty, and they try to control a lot of different things in their lives to sort of negate that uncertainty. And so Pluto in conjunction people are usually very interested in psychology, because they're always trying to figure other people out and figure out what their next move is going to be. They're very interested in astrology, divination, tarot, those types of things. And also they're usually very deeply psychic. And a lot of this comes from, developing this energy, because you needed to, in early childhood, you needed to figure out who had the power, who was showing up, what was about to happen next, because you experienced something that was intense, right? And so you had to kind of be kept on your toes in order to deal with that intensity. But yeah, a lot of psychic energy with the Pluto in conjunction as well. All right. So do we have any questions so far about anything? I'm going to look at this. Yeah, we will be doing a recording at the end. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to jump into, oops, now what did I do? I made everything all crazy. I'm going to jump into this, and we will take a couple breaks, because this is going to be probably about 3 hours long, maybe a little bit longer than that. So, we'll break in maybe like a half an hour or so, and we'll go from there. But so right now, we're going to get into the Sun in conjunctions. And so in general, the solar in conjunctions, people who have solar in conjunctions, they tend to take on a role in life in order to gain acceptance from a parent or an authority figure. It's usually one or both of the parents. And so it's because they feel unwanted, they feel rejected for who they truly are, so they take on this role, this energy. And the role that they take on can be indicated by the sign and house placement of the sun, and also the planet that's in aspect by the in conjunction. And so usually what happens with these sun in conjunctions is people that have them, they don't really realize that they're playing a role, but other people can kind of see through them, right? They think they're being authentic, they're convinced they're being authentic, but they're not. And so they'll have this sort of moment of reckoning at some point in their life where they realize, wow, I was not who I thought I was playing this role. I realized why I was doing it. And in order to truly be who they are and to truly live out their path and purpose in this lifetime, they have to do a complete 180, and they have to change. And that can be very difficult, because they feel like, this is the way that they gain love and acceptance truly, is through playing this role, because that was their experience in appeasing the father or appeasing the mother or something along those lines in early childhood. So often, they feel unwanted, they feel unappreciated, they feel not accepted, they feel very discontented. This is a very difficult in conjunction to have. It can be very difficult for people who have the solar in conjunction, because first off, the solar in conjunction, the sun in general, like I said, represents the life force energy. It's that vitality that keeps us going, that keeps us moving forward in life. And it's connected to our true soul's purpose. And it's what we need in order to feel meaningful, purposeful, and successful. And so when we're not connected to our sun and the energy of our sun in a way that's appropriate, we can feel depressed, we can feel a lack of energy, and we can feel like we're fakes, right? We're frauds. Like we're not living up to our own expectations or the expectations of other people. It feels like life lacks direction, lacks purpose, and lacks meaning. And so because people with the solar in conjunctions are often playing a role that is not truly theirs to play, they can lack direction. They can have trouble. They're always trying to find their purpose and find their meaning, and they're trying to find it through work too, which is actually a really good expression of this energy. You should probably find your purpose and your direction through work, but first you have to connect with who you truly are on the inside. And also people who have the sun in conjunctions, I have noticed this to be very prevalent, that they feel compelled to justify their actions, their intentions, whatever it is they're doing. They feel compelled to explain it to other people, to justify themselves to others. Also, they can be very apologetic in nature. So they're constantly apologizing for themselves just for being themselves, right? They're those people that are just always saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, when they didn't do anything. And that comes across in a lot of these different inconjunctions, especially when you look at the Venus inconjunction as well. But this is a common thing with the solar inconjunction. And so I'm going into the difficult stuff first, and then we're going to get into the good stuff. So there's a progression you'll see. So this isn't only just difficult stuff. It's not only just, lack of direction and, faking a role and all this other stuff. There's other stuff going on here. And so the way that the solar inconjunction issues develop are through early childhood experiences, right? And so there can be issues with the father and other authority figures early in life. Sometimes the parents can be either physically or emotionally absent. And again, this is, especially with the father. So they develop, first off, a defensive attitude about their existence as a result, right? Because you're used to feeling rejected by the father, by the mother, by authority figures in your life. So you feel like you need to justify yourself. You need to justify your existence. You need to justify your role. And the other thing is you learn to take on this role in order to sort of seek acceptance from the father or from any sort of figure in early childhood. So you learn to take on a role. And again, the role that you play is often indicated by the sign placement, the house placement of the sun in the birth chart. And so with this one, again, self-awareness is very difficult. A lot of times people lack a conscious awareness of who they truly are because they've spent so many years identifying themselves with this role. And even though they feel deeply unsatisfied and deeply happy, they feel like they're not going in the right direction, they're not living their purpose, they've convinced themselves that they are, but on a core level, they don't feel satisfied. And so, this is going to be really important. So accepting yourself is going to be key, and self-awareness and deep inner exploration is going to be key to sort of rectifying and resolving this inconjunction. And so the challenges of this inconjunction are to find and define your own role in life. If you have a solar inconjunction, you have to define your own role. You have to stop seeking acceptance and approval for the role that you're playing, and whatever it is that you're doing. And the way that you define success cannot be from other people's approval from outside sources, right? You have to find success from within. You have to find your role from the inside, your purpose from the inside. And so that can be very difficult from these people because, it really leads to attention-seeking behavior, right? Because you're seeking acceptance and attention from the outside and from playing this role. A lot of times also sun inconjunct people, they can identify a lot more with their rising sign just because the rising sign does represent this role or this projection of energy that we're putting out there. It's already a role that we're playing in order to get love and acceptance, right? That's part of what the rising sign is. It's an energy that we project out into the world because that's how we learn to navigate through life in our early childhood. And so a lot of times people can take on the persona of their rising sign as opposed to their sun sign, but also they can misuse the sun sign energy. So it just kind of depends on what's going on here. But they're tasked to stop seeking acceptance from the outside. And also they have a talent for leadership once they come into alignment with their soul's purpose and with who they truly are on a deep and profound level. They start to become their own inner authority. Another thing that happens that I forgot to talk about when we talk about the childhood experience is that sometimes the father could be really rigid, or that he could have been experienced as kind of weak, right? So that's something too. So you could have been neglected or given excessive attention to make up for it. Those types of things tend to come up as well. So again, you're learning to play these roles to sort of navigate this energy. But really the main gifts of this, once you find sort of indirect ways of leading others, right? So once you figure out who you are and you start acting as your true self, then you can lead others by example, right? And then you can gain recognition and success once you stop seeking it, which is kind of, it's kind of the way it goes sometimes, right? Once you stop seeking that thing that you think you truly want, you truly need, it comes to you anyway. So that's part of the challenge with the inconjunction. But leadership is the main talent of this, so leading by example. And it remains hidden until challenges are dealt with. You can feel like you want to be in a leadership role and that you're a really good leader, and you can show up to lead other people, but they might not quite follow you, right? They might not respect you as a leader because they can sense on a deep level that you're not being authentic. Also, clarity of purpose and pursuit of meaningful work. Once solar in conjunction people find their true path and they find the work that helps them to feel meaningful and successful, they really latch onto that, right? Because you've been seeking this meaningful sort of expression through your work and through, you know, the way that you're identifying yourself with the world throughout your entire lifetime. So once you truly find it and you connect with it, it's like you're unstoppable, right? And you can really find deep meaning and deep profound purpose through the work that you're doing out in the world, because, you know, the sun represents our success. It's who we are out in the world. You know, those types of things. Also, ambition, right? So these people can either be very ambitious or they can be very self-depreciating and not very ambitious. So it kind of depends, right? Because this energy can either be expressed really excessively or repressed. But for those who feel quite ambitious with the solar in conjunction, again, they can be very unstoppable, right? They can they'll latch onto something, they'll find that meaning, and they'll really pursue it, and then other people will follow suit. And so they find a dedication to their work. They find a sense of inner direction. And so that's one of the potentials and part of the talents, right? So finding meaning and purpose through work, career, those types of things. And again, you know, the planet that's on the opposite end of the in conjunction is going to give you a pretty good idea of what's going on. So that's going to give it a context, right? And it's going to tell you how the energy is being expressed. And so sun in conjunctions, sign and houses. So I just gave a general description of all the signs and all the houses. Obviously the signs are different than the houses, but I just wanted to put this up here as I'm talking about this for those who are not aware of, you know, what the signs and what the houses actually mean, because it's going to give it a little bit more context. So the sign in the house that the solar inconjunct is placed in can give you a good idea of how the energy is being expressed, what role you're trying to play, and you know how that can possibly go wrong. So the role that you're trying to play versus the role that is true to yourself can be similar, but it's not the same. And so, you know, a lot of times people who have solar inconjuncts maybe in the second house, right, they're focused too much on money, on finances, on finding their success through creating resources for themselves, right? But really maybe they need to be more generous, or maybe they need to focus less on that. Another example is, you know, 7th house solar inconjunct. So a solar inconjunction in the 7th house can indicate that you try to find your identity through your relationships instead of seeking it within. And that is prevalent already in the solar inconjunct because you're seeking acceptance and identity through the outside. But when it's in the 7th house, it's really tied in with your relationships. So you're trying to find a sense of meaning and purpose through engaging in relationship with other people. And that doesn't always quite work, right? So you can lose yourself in relationship and take on this role that is not yours to take on. The other thing is, you know, when you're looking at the sign, that's going to tell you how the energy is being expressed, right? The 4th house, or sorry, the houses give it context. So the sign tells you how the energy is expressed. The 4th house gives it a context. And so if you have a solar inconjunct in Cancer, that would indicate that you're playing a role that's very nurturing, that's very motherly, that's very domesticated, and maybe that's not the right role to be taking on. And you still need to, again, utilize that energy to a certain extent, but it could be that you're going overboard with that, right? Because that was what you were taught. Maybe you grew up in a household that was very traditional, and maybe you're not so traditional, and there will be other things in your chart that will indicate that. The 4th house indicates that you would be seeking this meaning and purpose through property, through real estate, through your actual home, through your actual family, right? So it's not the way you're expressing the energy, it's the context in which it's being expressed, that if that makes sense to you, the difference between the houses and the signs. And so, you know, the sign in the house placement, again, is going to give an indication of the role that's being played. The other planetary connections will influence this as well. And I'm going to go into some examples so we can kind of see how this all works together. All right, you guys. So this is the birth chart of a friend of mine. And so I'm just going to go through and I'm going to talk about her solar inconjunction. And so this one is a very good example. I chose people that I know very well, or clients that I at least have worked with more than once, so that way I could give good examples of what's going on in real life and in real time. But as you can see, this person has a lot of different inconjunctions. She has 2 yods going on here, one of which has the moon at the apex, so we'll be getting into this when we get into the lunar inconjunction. She also has another with Neptune at the apex. But the sun right here is in a inconjunct aspect, and she does have issues with the father, right? So this is someone who grew up without her biological father. She was raised by her grandfather, who was very traditional, right? That's Cancer. He was very much, she describes him as being like the patriarchy, which is interesting because she also has Saturn here, not in exact conjunction, but close with her sun. But so she has this in conjunction with the sun, and it's also conjunct her south node, which makes it a little bit more complicated. But in general, what went on early on in life for her is that she tried to play this role, this domesticated role, and it was in relationship with a man, right? So she showed up, she got into this really intimate, very committed relationship that she thought was going to be long-term. She thought it was going to be forever, right? And she picked up this role of being like the domesticated sort of housewife for a certain period of time, even though that's so not her, right? She has this very intense energy going on here. She has Mars in square with her sun. She has Pluto in square with her sun in a T-square, right? So she's very intense, very fiery. She's got a lot of other stuff going on here, but she decided that that was the role that she needed to take on during this period in her life. And so there was a certain point where that entire sort of facade, that entire role that she was playing came crashing down. The relationship ended, you know, it was no longer what she thought it was going to be. And so she didn't know what to do after that, right? It was like her identity was taken away from her. She had built up this identity around being in a relationship with this man and taking on this role because he was very successful out in the world, and she was going to help him and support him, right? That's very Cancerian. She was going to be the nurturing, the domesticated, the housewife's type of figure, even though, you know, she still had that fire, she still had that intensity during that time period, but she was taking on again this role. And part of that is probably because, you know, she grew up in a very traditional sort of upbringing where, you know, that's what was expected of women, you know, in her household and in her upbringing. And so she took on this role. It came crashing down, and she spent a couple of years just completely lost and completely devastated, depressed, right? Because that's the sun. She lost her role. She lost that vital life force energy, or that connection that she thought she had to her purpose and meaning in life, and she had to start over. She had to rebirth herself. She had to show up in a completely new way, and she has done that since then. But that was sort of this earth-shattering moment. She's not here to be this domesticated person, right? She's here to engage more with her true identity, which is still to support people. It's still to show up in support of others, but in a way that's very intense, in a way that's not domesticated, in a way that's not necessarily tying in her identity with a relationship with another person. She has to be herself. She has to, you know, come into alignment with who she truly is. And so, you know, having this sun in conjunct to Neptune can indicate, first off, being confused about your role in life, right? That's a lot of confusion. Anytime you have Neptune in conjunction, it can cause you to be a daydreamer. It can cause you to be very confused. It can cause you to be, you know, sort of wishy-washy and ambivalent about your identity and about who you are and what you are out in the world. And so, you know, that's one of the downfalls of the Neptunian in conjunction, and especially in conjunction with the sun. It depletes your vital life force energy through it dissolving all of these boundaries, dissolving all of these ideas that you have about yourself. And also it can have you can definitely take on a role with that, right? You can be anyone that you want to be in any given situation. That's the nature of Neptune in any aspect with the sun. It's like the changeling, right? It can cause you to be very deceptive, but it can also cause you to be very prone to deception from other people and very sensitive to deception from other people as well. And so what she's done actually to utilize this Neptune energy, which is at the apex of this yod, is Neptune rules film, it rules creativity, it rules photography, it rules, you know, creative expression in that sort of way, especially when it comes to art, film, photography, music, those types of things, because Neptune rules film. The discovery of Neptune was actually preceded by the discovery or the invention of the camera, which changed our entire perception of reality, right? That's what it dissolved our boundaries. It dissolved what we thought everything was, because how crazy would that be? Never having something like a camera, and then all of a sudden we have this magic box that can like create pictures of you. And so, you know, that was one of the things that was brought on by Neptune. So a lot of times people who have Neptune in conjunctions, they can have a gift for photography, for you know, creativity in that sort of way. And so anyway, so she became a photographer. She does like all this different multimedia stuff. And so she's learned to incorporate that into her identity, into her purpose, and all of that as well. But just kind of like a quick example of that. And so again, childhood, her father figure was very rigid. Her, biological father wasn't around. So that's very common also with the solar inconjuncts. There's some sort of, either the father's not there, or he's considered weak, or he's very rigid, very structured, very traditional, very sort of hard on you, right? And so they have very high expectations of you. And so you learn to play these roles to live up to his expectations. Okay, guys. So, lunar inconjunctions. Let's see. So, lunar inconjunctions, they indicate either problems with overexpression or repression of emotion. That's kind of the main thing with the lunar inconjunctions. A lot of times people who have the moon in an inconjunction, they aren't even aware of their own emotions, especially early on. They repress them, right? And there's a lot of reasons for this that we'll get into, but it could be that you just don't want to look at your emotions. You're not in touch with them. You feel like you're not an emotional person, or you're just not that type of, you don't have that type of energy, right? You don't have that type of connection to emotion, even though a lot of times you really do when you have a lunar inconjunction. This can especially be true with people who have like water placements of the moon, where early on in life they disconnect themselves from their emotional experience because they're very empathic, right? They're very connected to the emotions of other people. They feel things very deeply. They're like sponges for emotion. And so they learn to block off this energy because it's overwhelming, especially with the moon in Pisces. And so there's a repression of this energy. And so you're not in tune with your own emotions, and therefore you're not in tune with the emotions of other people. So you don't have to be overwhelmed by that. It can also be overexpressing your emotion, because when you bottle in your emotions too much, they're going to explode out of you at some time. Or it could be overconnection with other people's emotions. If you don't block that off, you can be very confused about what is your own emotion and what is somebody else's emotion, because there's a lack of boundaries in that area a lot of the time. But again, it's usually repression, especially if it's like a moon inconjunct to Saturn or to Pluto or something like that. That would indicate more so repression. If it's like a moon inconjunct to Mars, it could be an overexpression, especially of anger, passion, aggression, those types of things. There's also an overconcern of winning approval from other people. That's part of the lunar inconjunction. And that could just be due to inconsistent nurturing, those types of things, which we'll get into. And we talked about the increased emotional impressionability. Also, there's an increased sensitivity to shame, humiliation, and betrayal. You never want to betray someone who has a lunar inconjunct. They won't forgive you. That's just the thing. So if you have a lunar inconjunct, you're going to be more sensitive to betrayal, also to shaming and feelings of shame, and also humiliation. And again, that could stem from an early childhood experience of humiliation. So again, they're emotional sponges. They're deeply compassionate, deeply empathic, and they learn to become guarded as a means of protection from other people's emotions. So the moon in conjunction in early childhood, this often indicates that one or both parents were emotionally absent, or that they were emotionally rigid. One or more parents expressed one predominant emotion, or they were emotionally manipulative. That's another thing that can come up. And so a lot of times, the emotional rigidity, it'll be like, especially, let's give an example of the moon in conjunct with like Pluto, or especially with Mars. It could be that one or more of the parents expressed only anger or only intense emotion. And so you become very sensitive to anger and to this emotional intensity yourself. And so, you tend to block yourself off from those emotions. You don't experience them yourself. You don't feel comfortable expressing them, or you learn that this is the only appropriate emotion to express. And so you're only expressing anger all the time, right? And especially when you have a moon in conjunct to Pluto, it usually indicates that there's one predominant emotion that you're really comfortable expressing. It doesn't always have to be anger. It could be something else. But that's just an example that I'm using. But you're only comfortable expressing certain types of emotions, and that's a means of like protecting yourself. And it also has to do with what you learned in early childhood. But one or more of the parents could be emotionally absent, meaning that they don't give you the emotional support, the emotional encouragement. You don't have that emotional connection that you would have liked to have, or, especially when you were a child, you would have liked to have in early childhood. It could also indicate inconsistent nurturing, not feeling supported emotionally, like I talked about. So not feeling supported by your parents. Are we looking at, sorry, one second, Carlene has a question. Are we looking at the house and sign of the sun first, or the other planet and house first? Which weighs more on the meaning? The other planet weighs very heavily on the meaning, and we will start to get into the different planetary once we get into all the planets, because we're going to go through each planet individually, and then we'll start getting into a lot of the different combinations a little bit more so. But looking at the planet that's in the opposite end of the inconjunct aspect is going to give you a little bit more information than the house and the sign placement. The house and sign placement is sort of just to give it context. So if you look at the house and sign placement, it tells you how that energy is being expressed, or dysfunctionally expressed, not being expressed, whatever it is. And it also gives you the context in which it's being expressed. So that's going to be what the house and the sign represents. The other planet on the opposite end is going to give you a lot more information about the energy of this inconjunction overall, and sort of how it's being utilized and what patterns you're carrying. And so we will get into the combinations a little bit more so. But since we're only on the moon, I don't want to jump in and start talking about too much about Pluto or something when we haven't really covered Pluto. So we're going to get into that. But anyway, so the moon. So let's see here. What do we talk about? Okay, so again, one predominant emotion can be, so because there was that one predominant emotion, there could be just one that you feel comfortable expressing, so that's very common. Also, this can indicate, again, because also, it could be that your parents rejected your emotions, right? It could be that you were crying and your dad laughed at you or something, right? Or they told you just to buck up because you're a boy and boys don't cry or something like that. So it could be that your emotions were rejected, or you were told to repress your emotions, or you had to keep your emotions hidden for one reason or another in early childhood, and that stuck with you, right? A little bit more so than it would have for other people. So that would have been something that stuck out. Like you were told that you were not to cry, that you were not to act this way, that you were not to express anger, that you were not to express certain emotions. And so that could be a reason why you hold certain emotions in and you express others very freely. Let's see. So a couple other things here too. It could be that your parents were accusing you of betraying them or being manipulative in some sort of way, and so you become more sensitive to betrayal yourself. It could be that you were betrayed by your parents, or that you were embarrassed or shamed by your parents in a way that was public or in a way that affected you very deeply. A lot of times for women, there can be an embarrassment surrounding motherhood, fertility, development, sexual development, those types of things. There can be some sort of embarrassment or shame surrounding that in early childhood, where you feel sort of shameful of your body, which I know a lot of women experience, but this is especially prevalent and especially impactful when you have the moon in conjunction, because it indicates a discomfort with yourself as a mother, with yourself as a female, with your own fertility, with your own body, those types of things. And let's see what else. So again, this is more to do with emotions than anything else. Let's go on to the next one. So the challenge is here, connecting with your own emotions truly and deeply and learning to express them appropriately, right? You can express them indirectly. That would be a really good utilization of this energy. So if you can't express them, or if you feel uncomfortable expressing them in the moment out in the world in a way that, would normally be deemed as appropriate, or if you have a tendency to over-express your emotions and go overboard, journaling, expressing yourself through creative means, through creative self-expression, through writing, through art, those types of things, that can be a really good way to express that energy. If you have a moon in conjunct to Mars, for example, and you express a lot of anger way too much, doing something very physical with that energy, right? So like going out and like just screaming, or like punching something, punching like not a person, but like a punching bag or something, or doing like kickboxing or something that, will get that anger and that energy out, can be very helpful in regulating those emotions. Also creating appropriate emotional boundaries with other people, but without shutting down. So not letting other people's emotions overwhelm you or overtake you or overpower you, but also not completely shutting down to their emotions, and not shutting down yourself as well. So there's a talent here for influencing the emotions of other people. There is an emotional intelligence and an emotional understanding that can be developed, where you can understand people on an emotional level very deeply and very profoundly. This is really good for, psychology, for counseling, those types of things. Also strong intuition. So once you learn to connect with your intuition and to connect with it appropriately, then, you can have really strong intuitive abilities and a really strong sense of direction based on your intuition. This is also really good for creating a very beautiful home, family life, once the discomfort with that is resolved, because sometimes there can be a discomfort with creating home and family, or an over sort of emphasis on home and family and on, you know, that sort of energy, that supportive energy. This is also really good for nurturing and supporting others, again, if you're doing so appropriately. So not, you know, putting too much emphasis on this supporting, nurturing energy, but not completely running away from it because you're afraid of the, you know, emotional baggage that comes along with it. And I'm going to actually go to this first, and then I'll go to some of the other stuff. So this is Moon in Taurus, right? Inconjunct Pluto and Neptune as part of a yod. And so when you have the Moon as an inconjunct with Pluto, this can indicate, first off, that the mother, especially in the 4th house here, right? Because the Moon is in the 4th house. The 4th house rules, you know, the mother. It rules home. It rules family. It rules, you know, that early childhood experience, and it rules what you need to feel safe, supported, and nurtured, as well as, you know, the sign. So the sign being the Moon in Taurus, in order to feel safe, in order to feel grounded, you need to, well, first off, feel grounded, right? You need to have material comfort, material safety, you know, a really good material foundation. So you need to have comfort when it comes to finances, when it comes to having a place to live, right? That's solid, and that's a really good foundation for you, those types of things. But in general, the Moon inconjunct to Pluto, that indicates that you could have had a parent that was emotionally manipulative, that was vampiric in some sort of way, that was jealous. A lot of times this is jealousy from the mother directed at the child, and especially when it comes to women. This could also be a mother who expressed sexual energy inappropriately. That could be a thing as well. And I happen to know in this case that all of those are true. This person describes her mother as being jealous, manipulative, that she, you know, would go after this person's boyfriends, you know, in her teenage years. She would try to seduce her friends and her boyfriends and things like that, that her mother was always jealous of her, she was trying to live vicariously through her, and that she was manipulative, right? And she had a very intense experience with the mother in childhood. Again, this is not always the case. Not everyone who has Moon inconjunct Pluto is going to have their mom hitting on all their friends or anything like that, but that is one potential, and that's how this one showed up. The other thing is that, you know, again, this is one predominant emotion being expressed very profoundly, and this person is very comfortable expressing anger and aggression, but not necessarily as comfortable expressing sadness or fear or vulnerability of any sort. And that's very common with the Moon in conjunct to Pluto, not wanting to express that vulnerability, because this is a very protective energy. You're very protective of your internal nature. You're very protective of your emotions and what's going on the inside. Also with the Moon in an inconjunct to Neptune, again, inappropriate boundaries, being very confused about what was expected of you, especially the expectations of the mother in early childhood. That can be part of it as well. So there's a confusion surrounding nurturing, and who is the nurturing figure in your life. I know that this person had multiple mother figures, multiple nurturing figures in her early childhood, and that must have been, you know, very confusing for her. So that could be part of this as well. But there's a confusion around the identity of the mother. There's a confusion around the relationship with the mother. There's a confusion around your emotions. This can make you deeply empathic, where you need to shut down, right? When you have the Moon, especially in an inconjunct with Neptune, because Neptune dissolves all boundaries. It merges you with everything else, right? And so there is a need to protect yourself to a certain extent, but not to the extent where you're closing yourself off from your own emotions. And so the key here is to learn to express your emotions appropriately and to get comfortable trusting people, because this, again, indicates distrust, and there's a very deep sensitivity to betrayal from other people. So you're always waiting for other people to betray you, because maybe your parents betrayed you, or maybe your parents were constantly sort of suspicious of you, right? Because there was some sort of suspicion, especially with Pluto in an inconjunct to the Moon. But again, sensitivity to betrayal, shame, humiliation, all those things would have been a thing. You know, especially, and I know that a lot of these things are the case for this person. So, but, you know, learning to connect with your emotions, you can really learn to influence people on an emotional level, hopefully for a good way, right? Because when you have Pluto in conjunct to the Moon, you can become emotionally manipulative, or you could be prone to emotional manipulation from other people from the outside if you're not expressing that energy yourself. And then also, again, the fogginess, the confusion around your emotions. But this is also a deeply creative aspect. And also, this gives you a talent for supporting and showing up to support other people, to nurture other people, but to do so within the realm of appropriate boundaries, right? And that's really what the key to this is, because there can be loose boundaries with emotions and emotional expression. There can be an ability to really pick up on other people's emotions to the extent where it affects you a little bit too much. And so that could be part of the reason why this person would feel a little closed off. Let's see. So yeah, that is the lunar inconjunct, you guys. It's kind of, the sun and the moon inconjuncts are a little bit harder, I think, than some of the other ones. All the personal planet ones are going to be, quite difficult because they're personal to you, right? They represent those types of energies. Let's see. Okay, guys. So do you have any questions? I would like to take a break here. After we go into this. Okay, so we did cover the moon, Neptune. We did do that. And yeah, so the planets and houses for this one. So, let's see if I can go back here. Oops. Come on. Okay, so the planets and houses for the moon inconjunct, again, it's going to give you an idea of context, right? So an easy example of this would be like how we talked about, sort of similar to having the moon in conjunction with Pluto, having the moon in Scorpio or the moon in the 8th house. That could indicate really a lot of emotional repression, right? Wanting to hold in your emotions, wanting to not express them fully because you're very protective of your emotions. You're very secretive when it comes to those things, but also you're experiencing very deep, very intense emotions under the surface, even if you're not expressing them, right? And so especially when you have the moon in Scorpio or the moon in the 8th house, you really need to make sure that you're expressing your emotions appropriately, because that's really when it can sit and it can fester, because there's a tendency to want to keep things bottled up and to keep things hidden there. And the feelings that are going on beneath the surface are very, very deep and very, very intense. Also, something to note that I put in here, something that Lynn Coiner has discovered through her research, because she spent a lot of years researching the near-death experience. She has found that almost all near-death experiences are indicated by an inconjunction to a planet in the 8th house in the natal chart, right? It's activated by solar arc. I can't remember, there was a specific thing in the solar arc that would indicate it, but every single person, she said, that she has come into contact with who had a near-death experience has had an inconjunction to a planet in the 8th house. So just kind of an interesting tidbit of information. I don't know if you guys have those in your charts or if you have that experience yourself, but if you do, I'd love to know about it, because that's super interesting to me. So I'm going to pause really quick for a quick break. Let's see here. Oop, I'm frozen. I had a funny face. That's funny. Okay, so I'm going to pause this real quick, and we will come back in about 10 minutes. How does that sound, guys? All right. Sorry, there you guys are. Okay, I'm back. All right, so how is everyone doing so far? Are you guys doing good? Too much information? Not enough information? What's going on here? The information that I'm presenting to you, you can get from a lot of different sources. This information really is not available in the full extent anywhere, because a lot of this is a synthesis of information that I found from different sources, from different teachers, from different books, from different internet resources, and especially through my own experience working with Inconjunction. So this is going to be the place to find it. We will be covering midheaven, IC, inconjunctions, as well as ascendant descendant inconjunctions, so all of that will actually will be coming into later on. So yes, let's see. Okay, I don't look at Chiron inconjunctions. I mean, I could, but that's not something that I've really worked with or looked at. You know, aspects to Chiron are important to a certain extent. I do look at Chiron in the birth chart. The other asteroid that I look at is Ceres, which we'll cover a little bit, but you know, we won't cover that very deeply. Right now we're going to be focusing on the planets, north and south node, the cardinal points, different planetary combinations, yods, all of that, because there's just only so much we can cover, you guys. We're already an hour and 17 minutes in, and we're only at the moon. So let's just jump back into this, and we'll see how far we can go. If you have questions about those things, we can definitely, at the end, go into them. So let me pull back up the display. So if you do have questions about anything that we haven't covered in here, I'd be happy to go into things. I've had some questions emailed to me in advance for people that aren't able to attend live, you know, especially about like synastry and composite and those types of things. I'm not going to go over synastry specifically in this, but if we have time at the end, I'm going to cover as many of those questions as possible and as many of your questions. So if you have specific combinations that you want to go over, you know, send them along the way as you think of them, and Carlene will relay them to me, and I will go through, you know, when we do Q&A and things like that, and I will answer them. Okay. And Carlene says, everyone wants my notes. All right, guys. Well, you can see them on the screen, right? My notes are all handwritten, so I can't send them to you. I always handwrite my notes, and if you've seen any of my videos, I have tons of notes all the time. If you had a reading from me, too, I'm always, like, looking through my notes. Anyway, so let's get back into this. I'm going off topic. Okay, guys. So you're going to probably have to rewatch some of this because there's a ton of information on here, and I could go even deeper than what I'm going into, but I'm trying to keep this reasonable, right? So we're going to get into Mercury now. All right. So, Mercury inconjunctions, you guys. Mercury inconjunctions are very interesting because they indicate a disturbance in the ability to communicate clearly. And everybody needs to be able to communicate with other people, right? So this one can be very disruptive in terms of your ability to navigate through the world, especially in early childhood, because it can indicate that you are either a slow learner and maybe you were made fun of for that, or you were really, really intelligent and you were made fun of for that. Maybe you felt different because you were so smart and you used big words and other people did not quite appreciate that, especially the other children. It could also be that your parents sort of made you feel stupid even though you weren't. There are a lot of different things the Mercury inconjunction can come up with, but in general, it's a disturbance in the ability to communicate clearly. And so usually it is that these people are highly intelligent, but there's a delay in communication, or there's a disturbance in the ability to communicate. You might withhold information from people, or you might over-explain things. Sometimes, like I mentioned before, the speech is either really blunt or abrasive, and so it can be off-putting for some people, right? There can also be a lack of confidence in your communication skills and your intellectual abilities. So there's a need to prove your intelligence to other people due to that lack of confidence, or due to that experience of being seen as less intelligent than what you truly are, or feeling like you're not being recognized for your intelligence, or feeling ashamed of your intelligence, or uncertain or insecure in some sort of way. You could feel like you're not smart enough, right? But really, usually these people are. Usually when you have a Mercury inconjunction, they're very, very intelligent, but they just have sometimes a difficulty communicating and getting their points across. There can be a need to prove intelligence to others. Usually these people are very thirsty for knowledge, especially practical skills and things that they can sort of use to prove their intelligence to other people, to prove their knowledge. Also, Mercury inconjunctions definitely bring a sensitivity to criticism. That can absolutely be a thing as well. Okay, so Mercury in conjunctions in early childhood. So there's usually some sort of early childhood embarrassment over intelligence or over speech. I've had more than one client actually, who has had issues with speech and language growing up in early childhood when they had a Mercury in conjunction. One of my clients moved from a foreign country and she didn't speak the language, and so that was very difficult for her because she felt like she couldn't connect and communicate with her peers, and she felt like she was made to feel like she wasn't as intelligent, right? Because she's not knowing the language, so she was a little bit behind everybody else. So it could be that you're really intelligent, but for some reason you were behind, and it was something that was beyond your control, and it could have been circumstantial. That could especially be the case, with the language thing, if the Mercury in conjunction is in the 3rd house. In the 9th house, too, that can indicate moving from a foreign country, right? Something along those lines as well. So not speaking the language, those are things that can show up. Or if it's an in conjunction to Jupiter, especially, I think that one might have been an in conjunction to Jupiter, actually, the one that I just referenced where she didn't know the language. If it's a Mercury in conjunction to Jupiter, it could be an issue of like living in a foreign country, not knowing the language. It could be an issue with understanding language, communicating, writing, those types of things. Sometimes these people have speech impediments. They can't pronounce their R's properly, or they stutter, or something along those lines. And so even though they're really intelligent, there's a difficulty in getting the information out, and other children can make fun of them. They could end up having to go to special classes and things like that. And so there's an embarrassment, right, over that. Sometimes they are slow learners in certain areas. I have one person that was really bad at math, but was highly intelligent in like language and words. So the kids made fun of him because he would use weird language and big words, and he had to go to like special math classes, even though he was really smart. So it just really depends on what was going on in the early childhood experience. It could also just be that the parents disregarded the information that you shared, so they would like ignore you, or they'd be impatient when you would try to communicate them, or indifferent to the communication that you were trying to get across, or your ideas. They would have just kind of written you off because you're a child, even though you were expressing this high intelligence for your age, or something along those lines, or you thought that your ideas were really good, and then you went to tell your parents, and then they'd always let you down because they wouldn't listen, or they would just kind of laugh at you or something. It could be a lot of different things. But the native's parents, or the parents in the situation, usually avoid communicating directly with the child. So for whatever reason, they're not communicating well with you. Also, sibling rivalry could be a thing, or peer rivalry. So that could cause you to feel inferior because you are always competing for attention. You're always competing to be the best. Your parents could have also been very critical of you, or your teachers could have been very critical of you. This is a very a prominent indicator for self-criticism, or for being very, again, sensitive to criticism from other people, because Mercury, ruler of Virgo is all about criticism and judgment. So that's part of this as well. You could have been punished too for sharing information with parents. You could have been punished for lying, or you could have been punished for being truthful, so you learn to lie. So that's another thing too. There's a sensitivity to lying and deception when you have a Mercury in conjunction. It could be, sometimes it's that you learn to be lying or deceptive yourself, just because of whatever happened in your early childhood experience. But usually these people are very sensitive to lies. They don't like to be lied to. That's one of the things that they're sort of not tolerant of. But on the other end of the spectrum, they can learn to lie and to fabricate in order to, have their stories, their whatever it is, their communication accepted by other people. And that a lot of times can be the case when you have Mercury in a Neptune and an in conjunction. There's deceit, there's lies, there's deception. And so you either pick that up from your parents or from people in your early childhood environment that, lying is the way to get what you want. Or lying is a way to get your point across, or, you become very sensitive to it because you've experienced what it feels like to be lied to like that. Okay, so there are a lot of interesting challenges with the Mercury in conjunction. Usually these people are attracted to ideas that are unpopular, that other people don't really want to hear. So they're really good at revealing new information, or bringing things out in new ways, taking different viewpoints that people don't always want to look at and presenting it to people in a way that they can digest, right? That's one of the Mercury in conjunct talents, especially when you have a Scorpio connection or a Pluto connection. There can be a need to dig up information and to bring it out and to let people see it. And it can be things that are deep and dark and people don't necessarily want to look at, but you throw it in their face and maybe you do it too bluntly, right? A lot of times these people speak really bluntly, or they can be self-depreciating too, or it can be a combination of both, right? You have these really blunt things, this like information that you just deliver in a way that can be sometimes tactless or abrasive, and you can also be very apologetic or self-depreciating in your speech and in your manner of speech. You're always apologizing for your ideas, always apologizing for talking. I have someone that I'm going to show as an example who does just that all the time. Always apologizing for everything that she says before she even says it, and so that's very, very common because you're made to feel inferior, and so you feel like you have to justify what you're saying in some sort of way. You feel like you have to be apologetic for your speech, and so the challenge here is to learn to communicate indirectly. And so we went over this a little bit at the beginning, but you can communicate indirectly through visuals, so through explaining things in a way that's very visual, especially if you have that Neptune inconjunct or your Mercury's in Pisces. If Mercury's in Pisces, you already think in visuals and impressions, but if it's in an inconjunction, you need to explain it in that way, and it's going to help you to get your point across. Or if the moon is involved or another sort of water planet or water sign, it's going to be much easier for you to explain things in feelings, impressions, visuals, allegory. You can explain things using humor, especially if Jupiter's involved or Sagittarius or the ninth house. Stories are going to be really important, storytelling, those types of things. So you can communicate truthfully, but do it in a way that's gentle, right? So people are going to be more accepting of it. And also, when you communicate directly, you might think that you're saying things in a way that people understand, but then you realize that they didn't understand you. And I have one person who communicates in a way that he's so intelligent, but everything he says is so scientific and so like research science, oriented, that like he's using so much jargon. And even me having a bit of a science background, I can't follow, right? So he's really intelligent, and he thinks he's conveying something, and he thinks he's dumbing it down for me, but he's not. So that's another thing that can happen with this, especially maybe if it's a Mercury in conjunction to Uranus, right? That's one of the ways that could be expressed. You're over-intellectualizing things. You're making it too scientific, too convoluted, too complex. So again, using examples would be a really good way to communicate indirectly instead of just saying the facts. Using examples, using visuals. So there is a talent for balancing various viewpoints, presenting different points of view, especially if Mercury is in Libra or it's in conjunction with Venus, or if it's in the 7th house, those types of things. It's all about fairness, balance, presenting different points of view. Sometimes playing devil's advocate, right? That can be a thing if you have Mercury in one of those placements. You do have a talent for writing, communicating, and delivering information. A lot of times I tell people this and they're like, I don't think I'm really good at communicating. Well, you are, right? And you have really important things to communicate because you've been studying your whole life. These people are usually very hungry for information, but they have to find the right way to deliver that information. And so, the trick is to present new, potentially disruptive information in ways that are more easily accepted by other people. And usually these people can be really great writers, really great teachers, and really great communicators. It's just a matter of honing in on those abilities. And again, the planet on the opposite end of the inconjunct can show you a little bit more of how to utilize that energy and what your talents truly are. And we're going to get into some examples, of course, and I'll go back to this one in a second. All right, so this one is someone who has a Mercury inconjunct to the South Node, which we'll get into because that takes on a more faded, sort of predestined importance, where this is tied up with your destiny, or this is tied up with your past life experience in some sort of way, especially when the inconjunction is to the South Node, but really, there's a semi-sextile to the North Node going on at the same time. And so this is a pretty tight inconjunction. This is also an inconjunction technically to the Ascendant. It's only off by a couple of minutes, so I would count that as well. But so this is a person who thinks in visuals and impressions and in sort of this non-linear, non-physical way, but she's learned to adapt, to acquire a lot of information. This is someone who's a mathematician. She's an economist. She's studied, economics and, has a master's degree and all of that. She also works in the tech industry and things like that now. So she's kind of going against her true, mercurial nature because she needed to prove her intelligence, right? That's part of that. And so, she's highly intelligent, very, very smart and she has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge to convey, but first off, she definitely over explains herself. So she feels the need to be redundant in her speech. So she'll explain things over and over again, or she'll explain it and break it down too much where there's a little bit too much detail, probably because, earlier on when she has Mercury in Pisces, I would assume that she would have explained it very vaguely, right? And in a way that was confusing. There was not enough detail. So she learned to like overcompensate for that by over explaining it. The other thing too is that, I know early on she felt a little bit rejected and all those different things. There's a lot that goes into this, especially there's an inconjunction to I guess this isn't really an inconjunction to trans-Pluto, but the sun is in an inconjunction to trans-Pluto here too, which we can get into. That indicates, a perfectionistic parent who was, very critical, very judgmental, and so that was part of the experience as well. But with Mercury in the inconjunction, she apologizes for everything she says before she says it. She always says, before she says something, she'll preface it. If it's something that's unusual or a little bit different or outside of the norm, she'll preface it by saying, I know this sounds stupid, before she even says it. And so she's discounting what she's saying before she says it. And she's aware of this too, but she still does it over and over again, right? Because she's not comfortable just expressing herself without apologizing first, or without justifying what she's about to say, or without discounting it, right? So that way, if somebody does ridicule her, she's like, well, I warned you, it was stupid to begin with. I warned you, right? Not literally, but subconsciously, that's what's going on here. So it's like forewarning someone that your ideas might not be taken well, or that they might not understand you, or they might not agree with you, or whatever, because you're used to being ridiculed and shut down. And so this was unfortunately an experience that she had. And this is someone who hasn't fully rectified this transit yet, but I know that she will. And she's very, very intelligent, right? There's a fated circumstance going on here with this as well. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the North and South Node in inconjunctions, because I have some very interesting examples of those. But it indicates a need to let go of something. It indicates a need to let go and surrender something that happened and experienced in the past or in a past lifetime that is causing you to feel insecure in this way, right? And so, that we'll get into a little bit more so later on. Let's see. Trying to keep up on questions and things like that. All right, so Venus in conjunctions, guys. Venus in conjunctions. These ones are hard. I'm going to be honest. These are some of the more difficult ones, especially when you get into Venus, because when you're looking at the sun and the moon, it's a deep personal dissatisfaction, and it's like there's a disconnect with the self, right? When you get into Mercury, Venus, and Mars, these are the interpersonal planets, so it's difficulty engaging with other people, and it also is personal as well, right? There are personal issues that go along with this. It's an interpersonal issue, so it makes it a little bit difficult to navigate through life and to interact and engage with other people. And so, that's why Mercury, it gets a little difficult, because it's hard to connect with others, through communication. And with Venus in conjunctions, it's difficult to connect in relationship. And so that's a big thing. Dysfunctional relationships with Venus in conjunctions are absolutely a thing. I see a lot of that. And usually it's stemming from issues of the person's own self-worth. And so these people with the Venus in conjunctions, especially if Venus is in retrograde, because if Venus is in retrograde, you already have an inherent feeling of being unlovable or unworthy. And when Venus is in an inconjunction, it brings that as well. So it increases that tenfold. And so Venus in conjunctions, these people are usually the most lovable, most charismatic people, but they feel unlovable, they feel unworthy, and they feel unattractive. They're usually very personable, right? They're usually very good with connecting with other people, but they don't feel like they are. And so they feel unattractive in some sort of way a lot of the times, or they were sort of given too much attention early on for being attractive. And so they place a lot of attention, a lot of energy on their physical appearance, or they let themselves go completely. That can be totally a thing. So over grooming, over emphasizing the appearance to try to make yourself perfect, right? To make yourself feel attractive and feel lovable and feel worthwhile, because in some respect you were taught that your value as a person was tied in with your appearance. Either you were made fun of for your appearance, your parents made you feel bad about the way that you looked in some sort of way. That's the case a lot of the time. Maybe you had a mother that was really fixated on weight and on looks or something like that, or a father that would criticize you, for the way that you looked or something along those lines, or maybe even just your peers in early childhood. Maybe you had an ugly duckling phase or something like that, where, you're growing into yourself, and so you're made fun of and picked on for the way that you looked. So you you tend to focus a lot on your own appearance and be very critical of your appearance. Or, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, you were given so much praise that you learn that your worth comes from your appearance, right? You were a very cute child, you're a very beautiful young woman, and people focused on that. So you learn to use that only as a gauge of how worthy you are of love and how worthy you are as a human being of other people's affection. And so there's a difficulty here receiving. People who have this inconjunct aspect, they usually have a difficulty receiving praise from other people, compliments. These are the people that when you give them a compliment, they'll be like, oh, no, you know, that old thing, you know, my hair looks like crap, whatever. You know, like you'll tell them, oh, your hair looks beautiful. They'll be like, oh my God, my hair looks awful today, but thank you. You know, they'll have to discount it in some sort of way, and they have trouble accepting it. They also have difficulty accepting gifts and accepting help from other people. That can be a thing as well. You know, even when you learn to accept, even when you learn that you're doing this and you learn to start to accept praise, and instead of saying like something to negate it, you start to accept it. And when people offer to help you, accept their help and all those things, you always, for a very long time, will carry this feeling of guilt when you do accept praise and you just accept it willingly, right? When you do accept gifts, when you do accept help, it's a guilt, like you're not deserving of this. And, you know, the context of this and what it is will depend on the opposite end. Especially so, you know, if you have Venus in inconjunct with Jupiter, you could have learned that love could be bought. So another thing too is that you learn that love is conditional because you have an experience of receiving only conditional love in childhood. And so again, the Jupiter Venus aspect could be that you learn that love could be bought, you know, with goods, with money. Or if you have Jupiter in the second, or Venus, sorry, or if you have Venus in the second house or in Taurus, or if you have Venus, you know, in an inconjunct with a planet that's in the second house, again, those are things that could be really prevalent, is learning that your money, like money can buy love, right? And so maybe your parents they bought you off, they bought your love, they gave you presents and gifts because they weren't around as much. So that's something that could be possible as well. Also dysfunctional relationships. So because you have you know, low self-esteem, low self-worth, you don't feel worthy, whatever it is, on whatever level, in whatever context, you can attract people that can manipulate you and take advantage of you in that way. They realize that you have this underlying self-esteem issue, so they'll prey on that. And again, this isn't always the case for your entire life. This can be more prevalent early on, and then you start to learn, right? You start to learn. You can have really, really good relationships, but you have to really start working on your own self-worth and the way that you value yourself. Let's see. And then also, there can be a challenge with experiencing leisure, engaging in things that are pleasurable and fun and that feel good because you feel like you don't deserve them, right? You're not deserving of leisure time. You're not deserving of pleasure. You feel guilty for taking time off. You feel guilty for indulging in buying something nice for yourself. Those types of things can be a part of it as well. Also, there can be a difficulty engaging your worth when it comes to setting a price for the work that you're doing or valuing yourself in that way. So if you're a business owner, you could either charge way too much and like overvalue your work, or you could charge way too little and, you know, not get what you deserve. And in the case of someone who works for someone else, it could be, you know, allowing yourself to work for wages that are far below what you should be compensated and being afraid to ask for a raise. It could also be demanding too much money, and then your employer's like, well, we're just going to let you go, and you know, that kind of thing. So there's an issue with gauging how much you're actually worth in terms of monetary value and what your time is worth. Okay. So, like I said, you know, you could have received conditional love from parents in childhood. So they could have used love as sort of like a reward for good behavior. And when you weren't behaving in the way that they expected you to behave, they withheld love and they withheld affection from you. Also, this could be that your parents themselves had sort of like a weird relationship or like a sort of a repressed attitude toward love and sexuality where they didn't show their love for one another in front of you. So you got a weird idea of what it is to be married or in relationship, or maybe they didn't truly love each other. Maybe they were together just, you know, for the sake of the children. So there could have been that they didn't express love very freely, or they overexpressed it and it kind of grossed you out. That could be a thing too. And again, the child could be made to feel unattractive by peers, by parents, whatever it is, or they got way too much praise for their looks, so they learn that all their value is in the way that they look because they are so beautiful. And so, you know, again, this gives you a weird idea of your attractiveness and your self-worth. Let's see. Okay, so the challenges here, learning to receive is one of the biggest challenges of this. So learning to receive. So one of the books that I recommend for all of my clients that have a Venus in conjunction is a very, very simple book. It's called The Power of Receiving. I don't know the name of the person who wrote it. I usually have it somewhere nearby. I don't know where it is right now, but it's called The Power of Receiving. Search it, Google it. You'll find it's a very small, very basic book when it comes to sort of self-help books, which are not usually my thing, but I found this book to be tremendously helpful, and it's very simplistic and very usable in terms of the information, the exercises that it provides for you, because really you need to learn to receive. You need to learn to receive love from other people. You need to learn to receive compliments, praise, help. You need to learn to enjoy, things when they come to you instead of just feeling guilty about it when you do receive something. Also, another thing is overcoming fixation on appearance, learning that you don't always have to show up looking perfect, or that you don't, or sometimes people too, they'll let themselves go, right? So it's about, they'll make themselves unattractive and then they'll complain that people aren't attracted to them, that kind of thing. So, you have to find a balance there. Sometimes these people can be like obsessed with plastic surgery or things like that, or getting like facelifts or Botox or whatever. You need to learn to let go and to let yourself naturally age, to let yourself just be who you are. But still, you obviously want to make yourself look good and presentable and all those types of things. So you got to find a balance there. If that is something that's really prevalent for you, especially with Venus in conjunction in the first house, this can be the case. So just, being aware of that. Learning to relax and enjoy yourself. As I mentioned, these people have trouble experiencing pleasure, experiencing relaxation, leisure time. Seeking appropriate compensation. This can be a big one too, especially, for women, right? Venus rules women, and women a lot of times are not paid as much as men. We don't ask for the right amounts of money because we're used to being undervalued in the workforce. So this is especially prevalent if you are a woman who has a Venus in conjunction. This can be with men too, obviously. This is anyone with a Venus in conjunction, but I'm just saying in general, this is already something that happens to many, many women. And there are also many, many women who have Venus in conjunction. So, it makes it more so the case if you have this in conjunction. So make sure that you're seeking appropriate compensation, but not too much, right? So you have to learn to gauge your worth. Stop seeking love and approval from the outside, which is hard to do, right? Because Venus in conjunctions, they really need approval from an outside source. They really need approval through their relationships and through other people to sort of prop up their self-worth, right? Because there's a feeling of unlovability a lot of the time. So learn to love yourself first. And again, this isn't all the time, especially if you're older, you've been working through this, right? This is something that it'll come up now and again, if you have been working through it, but it's not a lifetime thing. You're not always going to feel this way. You're not always going to attract like dysfunctional relationships. You're not always going to feel unlovable. This is something that you learn to work through. And so talents here. So first off, talent for aesthetics, right? Because Venus is a focus on looks, and especially if you're someone who's fixated on appearance, you learn to make things beautiful, right? You learn to appreciate aesthetic value. This is really good for art, music, and creative pursuits. And this could be good for a lot of other things too, but again, you have to look at the opposite end of the in conjunction to get a better idea of that. Healthy respect for material pleasure, that's something that you can develop. Learning self-love opens you up to opportunities for deeply fulfilling relationships, and I've absolutely found this to be the case, but you really have to work on yourself first. And I've seen this a lot of times. People will have very healthy relationships, once they learn to gauge their worth a little bit more appropriately, I would say. Let's see. And so we talked about some of these house placements. Let's see if there's any that stick out that would be interesting. Well, like Cancer. So if you had, I'm just going to give a couple random examples of this. So like for Cancer, if you had Venus in Cancer or Venus in the 4th house in conjunction, it could be that you learn that that you're part of your self-worth, and part of the way that you get love and affection is through showing up and being nurturing, being caring, being supportive, those types of things, right? So you're engaging with that type of energy. Let's see. I'm going to jump to this. So we have a couple different inconjunct examples for Venus. So this one is the chart that I went to a couple charts ago. And so this is a friend of mine. And again, she has a lot of inconjunctions. There's no line. I should have added it because you can add it so you can see it. But this is an inconjunction very, very tight between Venus and her ascendant. And so her description of her experience as a child was that she felt awkward and unattractive. She is one of the most beautiful people I have ever seen, but she felt awkward and she felt unattractive, and she felt too skinny. And she was made fun of for that. And she also described herself as being flat chested. And so later on in life, she actually got breast implants. So after that, she actually felt much more attractive, much more, worthy and much more lovable. So sometimes, enhancing your appearance can help you, right? It can give you the confidence that you need, but that can't be the focal point that you fixate on, right? So she came into her power after she got these breast implants, because again, this has to do with the appearance specifically, because it is an inconjunction to the ascendant. The ascendant rules the appearance. It's how you project your energy out in the world. It's how you show up for other people. And so there was a fixation on the appearance and on this sort of feeling like awkward and unlovable and unattractive. And so she remedied that. And then, after a few years, that wasn't necessarily the focus anymore, right? So that's part of it. So that's just one of the ways that that this comes across. And especially when you have a Venus inconjunct the ascendant, it's probably going to have a lot to do with the appearance. And also the ability to form healthy relationships, because there's low self-worth here. This is in the 7th house in Placidus. And, it is going to be in the semi-sextile with the descendant. So there is an issue here with, not forming good relationships because you don't have the self-worth, or you're expecting people to belittle you. You're expecting to have love withheld in those sorts of ways. All right, what is this one? And this is a client. I don't remember her specific situation, to be honest. I just pulled this up because she said that I could use it. And because she has Venus at the apex of a yod. And so this would be, again, issues of self-worth, issues of, also in relationships, she would need a lot of freedom, right? Because she would have an issue with intimacy. A lot of the times this can bring intimacy issues, especially when you have it in Aquarius. Venus in Aquarius is going to bring issues with intimacy because there's a detached sort of, sense of connection where it's a little bit voyeuristic, where you want to get to know people and understand them and feel like you're connected to them, but you don't want them to fully understand and connect with you, right? So you're sort of putting up this wall, putting up this front. So you're a little bit detached in your relationship style, and you need a certain amount of freedom because you're afraid to get close. And so that would stem from, again, feeling unlovable, feeling unworthy, feeling like you're not attractive or you're not good enough to have, pleasure, to have romance. In the 5th house, this is going to be a lot to do with being able to experience fun, play, pleasure, those types of things as well. You feel guilty for playing. You feel guilty for doing the things that you love to do because you don't feel like you're worth it. And so this, having this at the apex of the yod, which we'll get into the yods, but usually the energy is repressed when you look at the apex of the yod. So this would be a repression of the Venusian energy. And so once this is activated, this is someone who could be deeply creative, deeply expressive. In the 5th house, this is someone who's very passionate, who can do things that are very creative, very beautiful, who can be very artistic, right? Who can experience really deep, really passionate romance. But again, there has to be freedom. There has to be constant excitement, at least, constant change, right? Having Venus in Aquarius like this. There's a tendency, though, in the yod aspect to lean toward this sextile early on in life until this Venus becomes activated by one or more long-term transits, and then all of a sudden it takes over. And so, so she would be leaning more on this sextile, which would be a really intense emotional connection with other people, understanding people on an emotional level. That's the Pluto sextile, the moon. These other planets are obviously part of it too, but I'm going to count, mostly those as the sextile. But yeah, understanding people on a deep, profound psychological level, trying to figure people out, right? That's part of the Pluto inconjunct, trying to figure people out, trying to figure out who has the power, trying to constantly figure out what's going to happen next, a fear of uncertainty, and especially when it comes to your relationships, you really want to know what the other person's going to do next. Also feeling discomfort with expressing yourself emotionally in relationships, and having a discomfort with deep emotional connection in your close personal relationships, your one-on-one relationships, and your romantic relationships. You'd be easier able to express this energy in a way that, again, is disconnected, right? So this is connecting with like groups of people as opposed to connecting one-on-one with someone. All right, guys. Oops. Oh, I'm frozen again. Oh no. I don't know why that keeps happening. Okay. apologize for that. Okay, I'm here. I just want to check in and see how you guys are doing, and then I'll go back to the display. What happens when Venus is in conjunct Uranus? When Venus is in conjunct Uranus, you can be very disruptive in relationships. Venus in conjunct Uranus is an interesting one because Uranus indicates disruption, right? It indicates this sort of repression of this rebellious energy and then overexpression of rebellion. And so when you have Venus in conjunct Uranus, it can indicate that you'll be very disruptive to other people in relationships when things get a little too stagnant, a little bit too comfortable, a little bit too close, right? When it gets too close for comfort, you can do things that are sort of off the wall, out of nowhere, that are disruptive to sort of shake up the relationship and create that turbulence. Uranus indicates, in an inconjunct aspect in general, a repression of independence, a repression of sort of your rebellious nature, a repression of doing things in a way that's different, that it's eccentric, that other people might not accept, or it could indicate being overly rebellious, overly independent, right? So this is an excessive need for independence in relationships, and that's actually one of the most difficult aspects that you can have to your Venus, because it causes very turbulent, very chaotic situations in relationships, and it causes you to create them as well. So you're never going to be comfortable fully in a stable, long-term, like sort of committed relationship unless you have constant change and things are constantly moving, right? You're constantly doing different things. There's constant excitement, and if you don't have that excitement, and if you're not finding that excitement in your relationship, like in and of itself, then you're going to create that through ways that are shocking and disruptive to the relationship. And so that's a little bit about what the Venus in conjunct Uranus would represent. Okay. I'm going to go back to the thing. All right, Mars in conjunctions, guys. All right, so when we talk about Mars, the main thing we're talking about is initiative. It's action, it's will. So there can be an overexpression of will or a repression of will. So it could be that you act really impulsively sometimes, or that you don't know how to act appropriately, you don't know what action to take. All of those things can be a thing. Did I pull up the display? Yeah, okay, we're on display capture, cool. Sorry, I'm having a few computer issues. I think my MacBook's on its way out. Okay, so anyway, so Mars in conjunctions, overexpression or repression of will. It indicates impulsivity versus inaction. So again, either acting really spontaneously, really impulsively, acting too quickly, or not acting at all. It could be a repression of willpower. It just kind of depends on how you're expressing that energy. Usually it vacillates between the two. So in certain contexts or in certain time periods in your life, your will can be repressed. And in other time periods, in other contexts, you can act too aggressively, too quickly, go too hard, too fast. So this can also indicate sexual repression or promiscuity, because Mars does represent our sexual expression. So this could be that you have a repressed sexuality. Sometimes in men it indicates impotence, not always, so don't worry, men that are listening to this. But it can sometimes be that, that's sometimes a thing, and usually it has to do with shame or guilt in the early childhood development around sexuality and sexual expression. Also, you could want to prove yourself, as a man, right, by being promiscuous, or just prove yourself, and express yourself a little bit too much sexually, even as a woman. So, it could be sexual repression or promiscuity. You could go through periods of both. You could go through periods where you do not have sex for a very long time, and then all of a sudden you're having sex with everyone. That is sometimes the case with this. This is also a dysfunctional expression of anger. So you might hold in your anger, you might hold in your rage, and then express it sort of out of nowhere, out of the blue, and misdirect it, right? Misdirect it onto the wrong person at the wrong time. This could also be dysfunctional expression of anger toward you, especially when it's conjunct the ascendant. In my chart, I have Mars in conjunct Pluto, but Pluto's on my ascendant, right? So Mars is also in conjunct my ascendant. And so in early childhood, my father would yell at me for things that made no sense. He would just displace his anger onto me. And so that was something that I had to cope with and to deal with. And so if that is the case, if you have anger that is expressed onto you inappropriately, then you become defensive and reactive yourself. So that could indicate that you might have a bad temper, or you might be very reactionary when it comes to anger and aggression. When you sense even the smallest smallest hint of aggressive behavior, you could become very aggressive yourself as a defense mechanism, right? So there's a lot of different ways that this could play out, but this is especially a disruption in, expression of anger, expression of sort of intense emotion, those types of things. And this can also indicate health issues. Because Mars rules the immune system, it could be autoimmune, which, again, it's going to indicate... it's going to be indicated by what the planet is on the opposite end, especially with Neptune in conjunct Mars. That can indicate immune system issues where you have autoimmune, you have, a lot of bad allergies. That can be a thing because that's an autoimmune thing as well, or a weakened immune system. A lot of inconjunctions indicate the potential for health problems. But Mars, Saturn, and the Sun, I think, are the most prominent when it comes to those types of things. So that's just something to be aware of as well. And the way that you can work on this is through, using your muscles, right? Mars is the muscles. Mars is action, it's muscles, it's force. And so learning to utilize that energy in a positive way can actually improve all these other areas. So activity, physical activity becomes very important for Mars in conjunction people. Sometimes Mars in conjunction people, they feel very physically weak. They feel like they can't exercise or be active for whatever reason, but they need regular activity. They need a way to utilize this energy appropriately, and that's going to help you to regulate this energy, right? Because otherwise it's going to be expressed too much or not enough. So in early childhood, a lot of the times this develops through parental suppression of initiative in childhood. And a lot of these, again, the source, and people were asking about where they can get some of this information or notes or something, especially for the early childhood stuff. I would recommend Ellen Epstein's book, especially if you're into early childhood psychology or childhood astrology, right? Because you're going to get a lot of information out of that, because pretty much all the early childhood stuff that I'm getting into in these slides is going to be from Ellen Epstein's book. But anyway, so parental suppression of initiative in childhood. So the parents were either overactive, the child was either overactive, so maybe he had ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder, or one of those other disorders that they've created to put children in these little categories and boxes. So the child was very active and very aggressive. And so, the parents were trying to suppress their willpower, suppress their aggression, suppress their natural inclinations to play rough. Or the parents could just be oversensitive, right? They wanted like a good, well-behaved child that just sat there quietly in the corner. And that's not what children do, right? So, they became oversensitive to this hyperactivity, or to children just playing like children, right? Children run around, children scream, children are loud, children are disruptive. And some parents don't realize that. And so they could just want their kids to be quiet, sit and play nice, right? That's the Mars inconjunct, play nice. And especially with girls, right? I wrote that right here on the slide. So if you are a female with a Mars in conjunction, not always the case, but sometimes the case. You could have been a tomboy, or you could have just been, outside playing with your friends, and you were discouraged from engaging in stereotypically masculine play and behaviors. And so they told you not to play like the boys or with the boys. They told you to play with dolls and to play with, makeup or whatever it is, right? They told you that little girls don't do that. So you were expected to play nicely and to engage in, girl behaviors, those types of things, even though you might not have been inclined to do so. And so that could be part of the Mars in conjunction in early childhood. Not always the case. That wasn't the case for me, but sometimes it is. The child might have been physically stronger or weaker than his peers. Sometimes these kids are really active and very strong, to the point where you might accidentally hurt people, or the other kids might not want to play with you, that type of thing. Or you could have just been like excessively good at sports, those types of things as well, very physically active. Or you could have felt weak. You could have felt like you weren't, really the sports type of person. You were the one that was picked last in gym class, and that sort of affected you in some sort of way. So you had it ingrained in your psyche that, you're too weak physically and that you can't do these types of things. And so, that would have been something as well. If that is the case, if you are weaker, or if you feel that you're weaker than others, because you aren't necessarily so, if you feel like you're not athletically inclined, if you feel that you are weak for whatever reason, in a physical sense, it could be that you are inclined to romanticize action, to romanticize people that are muscular, that have good physical prowess, that are able to engage in like really intense physical activity. You might, go on Instagram and look at all these people that are working out and doing all these crazy, yoga poses, or doing, really intense physical activity or whatever, and it's sort of romanticizing it, like, wow, I wish I could be like that, that type of thing, instead of actually going out and doing it, when really, when you have a Mars in conjunction, you do have that potential. And if you are someone who has a weakened immune system, or if you have this sense of being weak physically, you need to engage in physical activity on a regular basis in order to activate your Mars, right? Because that is a weak Mars, and it's going to weaken your willpower as well. So strengthening your muscles, strengthening your resolve, and strengthening your willpower, they all kind of go hand in hand. Another thing is, parents might have used violence as a punishment or directed a lot of anger or yelling toward the child. And like I said in my example, a lot of anger was misdirected toward me. My sister did not have any of that anger directed toward her, and she was not a Mars inconjunct child. She didn't have the same thing going on. And so there could be a lot of anger, a lot of yelling, a lot of intensity. So you learn to be reactionary, or you learn to shy away from that type of intensity and to be afraid of violence, where you become afraid of your own anger and your own violent tendencies. So you repress them, and then they can come out at times again that are inappropriate. So just something to be aware of. You need to learn to regulate that energy and to express your anger in a way that's appropriate. Parents might have been angry or depressed, or both. That's something too. They might have vacillated between anger and depression. They might have been very angry in general, or they just might have been very sad and very depressed. Or you might have had one of each, right? That could have been a thing too. And so those are different energies that you pick up from the parents as well. And then again, the native taught by parents to repress anger or expression of anger became a necessary defense mechanism. All right. So the challenges: engaging in appropriate physical activity, like I said, is often key to resolving this energy and to utilizing it appropriately, because you do have a lot of courage. You learn to be very courageous. You learn that you can overcome everything and anything through your own hard work, through your own willpower, through your own action. But you need to, first off, let go of the need to prove yourself, because a lot of times people, and I'll show you an example of this, people have Mars in conjunctions, they need to prove themselves through action. And especially, let's say Mars in the 6th house or in the 10th house, it could be through compulsive working and through working really, really hard all the time, really intensely, to the point where you burn out your adrenals, right? That type of thing. So you need to forego the need to prove yourself through activity, and whether that's work or through that's physical activity, because a lot of times these people, maybe if you have Mars in the 9th house especially, or the 5th house or something that rules sports, you could be a compulsive, gym rat or something, where you're at the gym all the time and working out compulsively, and you need to prove yourself physically. So it's about engaging in activity not to prove yourself, but to do it for your own enjoyment and because you're passionate about it, right? And so letting go of the need to prove one's strength. Learning to assert yourself appropriately also, because sometimes people with the Mars inconjunct, they can be not assertive enough at different points in their life, or they can be overly aggressive, overly assertive, or they're stepping on other people's toes. And so you need to find ways to be assertive indirectly. So if you're not assertive enough, this could be a way that can make you more comfortable being assertive, right? If you're assertive in a way that's indirect, or if you're too assertive, asserting your willpower again in a way that's indirect, can help you to sort of rein it in, tone it down, those types of things. And so latent talents, courage, obviously. So courage is one of the first ones. So these people can be very courageous. They can get through anything. Self-discipline and strength of will, right? That's going to be really important for the Mars in conjunction too. So, learning self-discipline, learning that you are strong and that you can accomplish anything, especially if you're one of the Mars in conjunctions that has a weakened Mars, that's going to be really important. Taking calculated risks. Because those may ultimately be rewarded. Again, Mars in conjunctions, you can act too impulsively. So learning to take risks, because that's going to be a really important utilization of this energy, but to do so in a way that's calculated, where you're planning ahead, where you're not just jumping in and doing things. Leadership and the ability to inspire others, right? Because again, you had different hardships, you had to overcome this, that, the other thing, and you can lead people through inspiration. Also, these people can be very adventurous. So again, when you learn to utilize this energy, and also the opposite end can give you an idea of what's going on here. And so again, signs and houses, I pulled this up, kind of the same thing. We talked about a few of these, but it could be, especially, so one of the ones I do want to point out is Cancer or the fourth house, especially in the fourth house. When you have Mars in the fourth house in general, it almost always indicates violence or aggression in the home. And so when you have this Mars in conjunction in the fourth house, it could be that the aggression was misappropriated and misdirected, either toward you or toward somebody else. And so you didn't get to learn how to appropriately express anger because of this example that was set. So this is a lot of times the case with this fourth house. So anyone who has Mars in the fourth house, a lot of the times there was anger, there was aggression, or there was violence in the home. Also, this can make you much more accident prone if you're not acting on your aggressive tendencies. So if you're suppressing your willpower, you're gonna be bottling up a lot of frustration. If you're suppressing your anger, you're gonna be bottling up a lot of tension, frustration, all of that, and it can come out through accidents. So it can cause you to be much more accident prone. So just be aware of that. You need to figure out a good way to utilize this energy. All right, and so example. So this is an example of a Mars in conjunction to Jupiter, and this is the one that I mentioned, Mars in conjunction to the sixth house. And so this one, first off, we talked about Mercury. She has a need to prove herself through knowledge, this type of thing. Jupiter here too, that's wanting to be wise, right? Wanting to prove yourself through wisdom and through experience, wanting to know everything and to learn everything that there is to know and to be, the wisdom keeper, that type of thing. That's part of it, and wanting to impress other people. And so this is wanting to impress other people by working really, really hard. So this is a person that I know, she is a very compulsive worker. She's constantly working. She's obsessed with working. That's all she talks about. That's all she does. And so she tries to impress people with stories of how hard she's working. And, this is going to lead to burnout eventually, especially, in general, in the sixth house, that indicates the potential for health issues. And I know this is a person who is experiencing health issues, due to a lot of these issues. So you really need to, especially if you have Mars in the sixth house, take care of yourself. Don't go too hard too fast. You're going to burn yourself out. And this could cause immune system issues and other issues for you as well, especially adrenal fatigue. So especially if it's in the cardinal signs. Hers is not, so it's a little bit different, but okay. I'm going to see how you guys are again. Am I frozen? Of course I am. I think it's time for a new computer, huh? Okay. Let's... All right, guys. Let's see how you guys are doing. Do you have any questions about any of these things? All right, guys. Cool. If you have questions, feel free to jump in and ask the questions. Again, you might have to stop this, come back to it, all of that. There's a lot of information here. Mars in the 11th. There's a need to sort of engage in physical activity in groups. There could be a tendency to draw in friendships with people who are very angry, who are passive aggressive even. That depends on what's going on the other side. How do you determine what planet to put first? They're both just as important. It depends. The more prominent placement is going to be the personal planet or the personal point in your chart. So that's going to be part of it. Mars in conjunct Uranus. Carlene kind of just stepped away, and now I'm getting a lot of questions all at once. But the planet that you put first is going to be the personal planet. It's going to be the planet that is either Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn too, if those are the more personal, the more internal planets in terms of the way that they go in the solar system. But also, if it's going to be a planet in conjunction to a personal point, that's going to be important to look at as well. But both planets are important. There's not necessarily one that you put first because you vacillate, right? You go between one and the other. So sometimes you're going to be overexpressing one, sometimes you're going to be overexpressing the other. It's usually not that you're just rigidly doing one thing your whole life. You're usually going back and forth between the two. And again, the context, it depends on the context. It depends on what's going on for you during these time periods. Mars in conjunct Uranus, though, is an interesting one because that is one where you're going to be expressing, that indicates impulsivity for sure. Expressing your will in a way that's very impulsive, and that sort of shocks people and rattles other people's cages. So it's almost like acting just to be disruptive. It could also be, suppressing these disruptive tendencies because there's Mars in conjunct Uranus indicates a deep rage that you might not even be conscious of. And so you can act passive aggressively. You can express yourself in a way that's very disruptive, that rattles people's cages as an expression of that rage, right? It really just depends, though, on what's going on with you and what's going on in that context. But in general, it's impulsivity. It's acting in a way that's going to be very disruptive to other people. And sometimes it's just for the sake of being disruptive, right? All right, guys. I'm going to do Jupiter, and then we're going to take a break because I need to take a second. All right, so I'm going to go back to the display capture, which is going to be the PowerPoint presentation. Oops. And I apologize for all these weird glitches. Mercury is in shadow, and my computer has decided that it doesn't want to function properly anymore, so that's going to be a thing that I'll have to deal with in Mercury retrograde. All right, guys. So, Jupiter in conjunctions. So Jupiter in conjunctions are interesting ones. Jupiter, you know, is the great benefic. So this one usually isn't quite as detrimental. If this is an inconjunct from Jupiter to one of the external planets, so, you know, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, any of those, you're not going to feel this quite as intensely. Although Jupiter or Uranus, you are going to need a lot of freedom. That's going to be a thing. Otherwise, you're going to get disruptive, and you're going to need to shock people and change things in a way that, you know, isn't necessarily good. Just because that's, you know, the nature of the Uranus in conjunction. Sometimes you might do that, right? Especially with Jupiter, because you need to constantly be changing, to be expanding, to be exploring new philosophies, to be broadening your horizons, those types of things. But with Jupiter indicates problems with social progress, personal development, and social perspective. So Jupiter in conjunction is one of the hallmarks of this is that you can be overly generous. So people with Jupiter in conjunctions, they want to, first off, they want to feel important, or they want to impress other people. Sometimes, not always, but a lot of times there's a need to impress others through your success. And so when you have so much that you can give to other people, then that makes you feel successful, right? Also, there can be a need to impress other people through your knowledge base, through your wisdom. So a lot of times these people are constantly learning, constantly seeking wisdom, constantly seeking higher philosophies, higher religious philosophies, you know, these types of things, which is good, right? Because these are the wisdom keepers. These people are very, very wise. You know, it's about learning to accumulate wisdom, not as a means to prove yourself or to impress people, right? Learning to accumulate wisdom because it benefits your own growth, right? It benefits your own spiritual growth. And so these people also can be overly generous. It could just be that you have a difficulty saying no, right? So that's part of it as well. So, you know, a lot of times these people are the people that they'll just say yes to everyone and everything, and then they get overwhelmed and they don't necessarily follow through with their commitments. So there's difficulty telling people no and asserting their boundaries appropriately. This could also be, and it's difficulty saying no. If this is an issue for you, I would recommend the Bach flower remedies, the century plant one, or century flower. I don't know which one, but it's called century, and it's the Bach flower remedies. That's really good for if you have trouble asserting your boundaries and saying no. That one I found to be very useful for that. I found that all the Bach flower remedies to be very useful for different things. Maybe I will do that as a webinar in the future, because a lot of these remedies are very much tied to astrological transits and aspects in the chart, and they can help you balance out your energy, especially when it comes to emotional and psychological issues. But anyway, difficulty saying no. Intimacy issues can absolutely be a thing. You have an easier time connecting with groups of people and focusing on like the group mentality, but a difficult time connecting one-on-one. That can absolutely be a thing. Also, these people, if they don't have a need to impress others, they can be self-depreciating because they feel sort of like a fraud, right? They feel like they're overrated and that they're going to be found out. So either you need to impress other people so that way you can show that you're, you know, good enough and that you're worthy of all the hype, or you can turn to self-depreciating sorts of behaviors and speech and a mindset like that, because you're trying to let people know not to expect too much of you, right? And so there's also an intense drive for knowledge, which we talked about a little bit. Sometimes it's to prove yourself, but eventually it becomes a search for knowledge, and in terms of like a search for and a quest for meaning and for expanding your horizons and broadening your mind. These people are sensitive to false promises and good intentions. A lot of times these people will fall for people's good intentions, right? You know, the road to hell was paved with good intentions. And people with Jupiter in conjunctions usually know this, right? Because you sense that they have good intentions. You sense that they intend to live up to their promises, but they don't. And a lot of times you're very overly willing to give people a second chance, or to, you know, indulge these false promises. All right, guys. So It could be, so with the early childhood experience, there's usually a disruption of physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual growth because the parents are either neglectful or they're overprotective. So there could be the parents were neglectful, they were indifferent, they abandoned you early in life, especially. Sometimes this indicates adoption or something along those lines. But usually there's an indication that the parents were indifferent at the very least, and they didn't really care what you did. So you didn't learn, you didn't get to learn from your mistakes, right? Because they didn't really care what was going on. Or it could be that you were abandoned by your parents in some sort of way, or you felt abandoned, or you felt neglected, or they weren't just there for you emotionally, those types of things. But a lot of times this can be a physical thing where the parents were just, they weren't around. Or the child was coddled and overprotected. That can be a thing as well. So it could be that your parents were constantly, they didn't let you make mistakes, right? Because they were coddling you and they were protecting you from everything. So you didn't get an opportunity to learn right and wrong. You didn't get an opportunity to learn through experience, which is really what Jupiter in conjunction is about. It's about learning through experience, and you need to be able to learn through experience. And sometimes you're catching up. Your wisdom, you have a lot of wisdom, but your experience is catching up to that wisdom, right? So you're trying to have these experiences to catch up. So a lot of times this indicates a philosophical understanding, but not an experiential understanding. And so that's what you're trying to develop. Other times it could be an experiential understanding without a philosophical understanding, but usually it's the opposite of that. So you feel overrated, or you were overrated in childhood. You received unwarranted, unwanted praise. You received praise for just everything that you did, right? That's what the child that's coddled and overprotected is going to be getting too much praise for every little thing. So you feel, and you sense that you don't deserve that praise, right? Because you're just getting praise for everything. It's like getting, the trophies for participation or whatever it is that everybody talks about nowadays. It's, you didn't do anything to deserve it, right? Or it could be that you were belittled as a child, and you were underrated, and you were not recognized for all of the efforts, all of the hard work that you were putting in, and that could be a thing as well. And so there could be an anxiety about being sort of found out for being not as good as you feel like the hype is, right? So it's an anxiety about not living up to all the hype, an anxiety about people discovering that you're not as good as, people say you are or whatever, even though you probably are, right? But a lot of times people don't see themselves this way. So you could feel like you don't have what it takes to live up to the hype. Let's see. Sometimes it could be that you had an oppressive religious upbringing, because Jupiter rules religion. I haven't necessarily seen any examples of that specifically, but that is one of the things that Alan Epstein says, and so I put it in here because, if you did have that, let me know. I would like to know about that. Okay. And so there's an internal when we talk about the parents that were indifferent, right? So it could be that the parents were indifferent. They caused you to sort of fend for yourself. They were just like, okay, figure it out yourself, do it yourself, that type of thing. Or they just weren't around very much, that type of thing. Maybe they worked a lot, or maybe they just were disinterested. So there's an internal feeling of smallness, right? Because you didn't get the attention that you necessarily deserved. And that can lead to a need to impress other people. This could also indicate that this could be why you're overgenerous with your time, energy, and resources, right? That need to impress people, that need to receive that acknowledgement and that reward that you didn't receive in childhood. Let's see. Also, this could be an indirect avoidance of confrontation. That's something that sometimes comes up, especially if it's a Jupiter in conjunction to Mars. That's often a thing. Or even to Pluto, that could be a thing too. Let's see. So the main thing with this is that there's an internal sense of trying to seek relief from other people's expectations, right? So when other people don't expect things of you, you feel relieved, right? You don't want people to expect things from you, even though you're trying to impress them and even if you are trying to impress them and you're seeking approval for those means, there's a sense of relief when people don't expect things from you. You want to find that relief from other people's expectations. So sometimes you discount yourself, right? It's that self-depreciation, so people don't expect things from you, or you might just not try, and then people learn not to expect things from you. That could be part of it as well, because that gets rid of that anxiety of not having to live up to the hype when you're not actually doing anything that's worth the hype. Let's see. And the parental abandonment too, you could have had a feeling of growing up among strangers. It could have been that you grew up in a culture that wasn't your own, or you grew up in a situation where you just felt like you were the outsider, you were the odd one out, those types of things as well. I think I covered most of those things. Okay. And so this can indicate also that you attract people that take you for granted. So you do all these favors for people and they learn to expect these things from you, right? So there's an energy of being taken for granted in childhood. So it could be that you showed up and did a lot of things and you were very helpful and nobody recognized or appreciated anything that you did. Your family members took you for granted. They took your role, your activities, whatever it is that you're showing up to do. Your generosity was taken for granted. And later on in life, your generosity can be taken for granted as well, because people learn to expect these things from you. They have these expectations that you're just going to do things for them because you're very generous, which can be good, right, in the right context and if you're regulating that energy appropriately. Let's see. All right, so challenges for this one. Learning appropriate boundaries and when to say no. That's going to be the biggest thing. So, when people ask you to do something, if you do not have the time, the energy to do it, you say no to it. That's going to be first and foremost. Overcome the need to prove yourself or to impress others, or, stop using that self-depreciation as a defense mechanism against other people's expectations. That could be a thing too. Dealing with abandonment issues that prohibit intimacy, because a lot of times Jupiter in conjunctions indicate intimacy issues, and a lot of that has to do with this fear of neglect, abandonment, or being taken for granted. So you don't want to get close to someone because you have this experience, especially early on, of being taken for granted. And also learning to be comfortable with confrontation. If that is an issue for you, that is something that you're going to have to learn to address and to deal with, because people, and also you can address confrontation indirectly, and that would be more effective as well, right? Especially if you're uncomfortable with it. So indirect approaches, not being passive aggressive, but not going head on with someone, butting heads, that type of thing. Going indirectly, like coming to some sort of compromise. So the latent talents, wisdom, due to high drive for knowledge and experience. So these people are the wisdom keepers. They are constantly studying, constantly seeking higher meaning, higher purpose through knowledge, through wisdom, through study. So these people are very, very wise. This is also indicative of conscious leadership. So they can lead with integrity, right? They can lead from a place of higher consciousness, a higher understanding. So these are people make really good leaders and really good teachers, especially in later years, and especially when they're teaching higher wisdom, higher concepts, broader perspectives. So we are going to pause now and just take a quick break. All right, I didn't freeze this time. All right, so we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes and we'll come back and then we'll get to Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all the other ones. And it looks like this is going to go a little bit more. Of course, my video stopped again. This is going to go a little bit more than 3 hours, so it'll probably be closer to 4 hours. But yeah, we're going to take a 10-minute break. All right. right, hello everyone. Let me check and see how you guys are doing. All right. Is it possible to get material that you're showing to us during this course on email? No, it is not. So you can get it through this course and you can take notes and rewatch. But yeah, that's gonna be how this is gonna go. Okay, hi Diana. I talked to you earlier, didn't I? All right, so we're gonna get back into this now. I'm going to get into, let's see, Saturn. So Saturn is one of my favorites to talk about in the inconjunct aspects because I have a Saturn inconjunct myself. And because, you know, Saturn inconjunct, so we did talk about Jupiter inconjunct Uranus, Diana. That has to do with a need for freedom, a need for independence, a need to you can't be locked down, you can't be tied down, you can't be held down to rigidity, monotony, those types of things. I mean, it's a little bit deeper than that, but we'll get into it a little bit more when we get into the Uranus inconjunct, which we're about to do right after Saturn. So I will keep that in mind. We'll go into the Jupiter inconjunct Uranus as an example again. Okay, so anyway, so we're going to get into Saturn in the Saturn inconjunct aspect. And so the Saturn inconjunct aspect is one that's very interesting because it indicates a lot of issues with boundaries. It indicates issues with taking on too much of the burden of responsibility for other people and for not necessarily, sometimes you can neglect your own responsibilities as a response to this because you're taking on too much burden. You feel like you're being really responsible and you're showing up to be responsible because you're responsible for all these other people and all of their baggage, right? So you feel responsible, but your own life turns into a little bit of a mess. And so let me get back to the PowerPoint so we can talk about this one because it's a very interesting one. Let's see here. Not that we need the PowerPoint to talk about it. I just want to show you guys. Oh, wait, let's see. So we talked about Jupiter inconjunctions a little bit. Okay, so let me go back to the Jupiter inconjunctions before we jump into the Saturn. So the Jupiter inconjunctions in the signs and houses. The signs in the houses can indicate what type of wisdom you're trying to sort of convey or trying to acquire or, you know, amass, because usually the Jupiter inconjunctions are seeking wisdom. It could also indicate who you're trying to impress if you are showing up and trying to impress people, those types of things. An example of this would be probably the next chart, actually. Yeah. So this Jupiter-Mars inconjunct that we talked about, right? So I talked about how Jupiter can indicate a need to impress other people through your wisdom, through your experience. Or just in general, also being overly generous. This is a person who's very, very generous with her friends, but she also often feels resentful, right? Because she was too generous, she gave too much, and then she's not appreciated for all the things that she's doing for all these people. And so she feels resentful, and she often expresses to me these feelings of resentment toward her friends because she feels like she puts herself out there and she gives and gives and gives, and they don't even meet her halfway a lot of the time because they just take her for granted and they just expect things from her. And Jupiter, so as I mentioned before, Mars in the 6th house and in Aquarius too, that's being you know, very scientific. She's doing something like in her work that's very scientific. She's working with technology, right? And so she's a very hard worker. She's a compulsive hard worker, and she's always talking about how hard she works and about her job and all these things. And that's fine, right? But she does it in a way that she's really trying to impress her friends and she's trying to impress the people around her through all of this hard work that she's doing, right? So that shows you how you show up to impress people and who you're trying to impress. So you're trying to impress your friends, in Cancer also your family members, those types of things as well. Not to say that every single person who has a Jupiter inconjunct is going to show up and try to impress people. She also has those self-depreciating tendencies which come from the Mercury inconjunct and also the Jupiter inconjunct as well. So there's a combination of those things going on there. But she does give and give and give. She's a very giving, very loving, very compassionate person, but she often feels that she's taken for granted. She feels that she's taken advantage of, and that's very common with the Jupiter inconjunct, especially when it comes to her friends, right? Because that's who she's showing up and you know, being overly generous with. And also at work too, she's doing the job of like 10 people. And so she feels like she's not getting the compensation that she should get. She's not getting the recognition. She should get the title that she should get, right? Because there's that need to impress people again with this title. Even though she says that she doesn't want the title, you know she wants the title, that kind of thing. But she's doing the work for like 10 people, or like, well, I said 5 people, probably more than that, because she works really hard and she's not getting paid for the work that she's doing. She's not getting compensated compensated, she's not getting recognized. And so these again are, this is someone who's very young, by the way, so she's going to be working through these things, and she has worked through a lot of them, and she has a lot of really great qualities that express themselves through these things, especially her intelligence, her wisdom. She is wise beyond her years, and that shows up in a number of different ways in her birth chart. And so, you know, as she continues on in life and she gets rid of this need to impress people, this need to prove herself, all these different things, you know, she's going to come into these talents more and more so. But this is someone who's a little bit younger, so my example of her is a little bit more of the psychological patterns and how she's sort of dealing with them now, but also sort of, you know, not at the same time. Okay, so we did those. Okay, so Saturn in conjunctions. Saturn in conjunctions indicate a need to prove oneself responsible and mature. And so this usually indicates someone who takes on a lot of burden and a lot of responsibility for other people. And this can result in you neglecting your own responsibilities, even though you don't even realize that you're doing it. And so the context of this is indicated by where Saturn is in your birth chart. And your Saturn return for people who have Saturn in conjunct aspects is going to be all about boundary issues and all about letting go of other people's responsibilities and for taking responsibility for the stuff that you've neglected as a result of taking on too much burden for others. I'm going to give an example of this because I have Saturn in conjunct, as I mentioned, in my chart, and that's been one of the biggest issues I've been dealing with over the past few years because I just finished my Saturn return. And so one of the things was that, first off, I take too much of the burden or responsibility for other people's emotional baggage, right, because I have Saturn in conjunct to the moon. And so that's something that I'd had to deal with and rectify as well. And also, the other thing was I have Saturn in the second house. And so I went into debt, all the while taking care of all of my friends, all of my ex-boyfriends, you know, thinking that I'm being all responsible, paying all my bills and all these things and going to school and, you know, working really hard, but all the while I was accumulating all of this debt. And so I was spending time, energy, money, helping the people that I cared about in my life, and that ended up being a bigger burden than I thought. And so when Saturn return came, it was time for me to start paying back those loans and start working hard and to start to disconnect myself from some people that, you know, that were expecting. Again, it's a similar thing, right? It's boundary issues. People are expecting too much of you, and you tend to take on too much. So I had to learn to tell people no, to not take on so much responsibility for other people, and to really focus on my own responsibilities first and foremost. And to sometimes, at some points, it was only my responsibility that I had to focus on, right? So that's something that comes up. Boundary issues are a really big thing with Saturn in conjunctions. So again, making sure Saturn. So the ones that have boundary issues are going to be Jupiter, Saturn, because these are all transpersonal planets, right? These are when we go from interpersonal to transpersonal planets and transpersonal relationships. This is where we merge ourselves with other people when we come into these outer planets. And so all of these planets are going to indicate some sort of boundary issue. It just depends on whether the boundaries are too loose or too tight or whatever it is. But Saturn, it rules boundaries, right? It rules structure. It rules regulation. And so boundary issues are always a thing with Saturn in conjunctions. Also, there is a tendency to be prone to chronic illness as a result of taking on too much responsibility and taking on too much from other people. And again, needing to prove yourself responsible and mature. And again, you do that through taking on too much responsibility. And that, you know, it could be taking on too much personal responsibility as well, because a lot of times Saturn in conjunction people, they don't want to ask for help. That's a thing as well. So they don't dump their burdens onto other people because they want to be the ones that are responsible. So even if when they're drowning and they need help, they're not going to call you and come to you with it unless it's absolutely necessary. And so this can make you prone to chronic illness, especially fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, you know, all sorts of different chronic illnesses if you do take on too much, because it's your body's way of telling you to stop, right? Your body's saying, well, now you're too sick, so you can't do it all, right? So that's part of it. And so that's another thing that I had to deal with, and I had to really, really work hard on during my Saturn return was, you know, resolving chronic health issues. And so that can be a thing that comes up. So it makes the Saturn return just even more interesting. But in general, there are a couple other things with Saturn in conjunctions. Because Saturn rules time, it can indicate a disturbed sense of timing. So it could be that you were made to be really patient in your childhood, or you were rushed when you shouldn't have been rushed. But there is a weird sense of timing where you either rush into things or you take it too slow and you miss the mark, right? So it's about learning appropriate timing. And, one of the things that can be helpful with that is astrology, obviously, because when you feel it's right and then the astrology and the planets align, then you can see that, okay, it is the right time to act. But at the same time, you could be waiting and waiting and waiting for the perfect astrology, and then you don't act, right? So you can see how that can be a double-edged sword there. But anyway, timing can be an issue for these people. Also, I've noticed with a lot of Saturn in conjunct people that they are awkward in large groups. It doesn't mean that you can't connect one-on-one with people. It doesn't mean that you can't connect well in intimate settings. But when you're in a large group of people, like a party where you don't know anyone, you're not the social butterfly, you're not the person that's running around talking to everyone. You feel awkward. And that's just one of the things with the Saturn in conjunct aspect that I noticed. All right, so let's get into the early childhood. So children learn to accept responsibility for those around them as a precondition to love and appreciation. It could have been that, the parents just demanded a lot of you. You had to take on a lot of responsibilities early on. A lot of the times these people had to grow up too fast. They might have had to act as surrogate parents to the siblings because the parents were absent or they were working really hard and they weren't around. It could have been that a parent, passed away early on, and so you had to take up the extra burden, or there was only one parent, you grew up in a single family household with maybe a single mom who worked, full-time plus, and so you had to take on more responsibility, or you were just forced for some reason to grow up really quickly. The other end of this is that you might have had parents that were around. That might not have been the case. You didn't necessarily have to take on all these responsibilities, but your parents made you feel like a burden. So they felt like they were taking on a heavy burden to care for you, and they felt like they were carrying this burden well, but really they were dumping it on you. So an example of this would be, constantly complaining about having to work so hard to provide for your family and how exhausted you are and how you can't, live the life that you wanted to live because now you have children and, so you had to change your plans and this and that and the other thing. It could be any number of things, but so they're dumping their emotional baggage on the children, and so the child feels like a burden. So really they're not taking on these burdens. They're not carrying the cross that they think that they're carrying. They're giving it to their child to carry. And so the children grows up feeling like a burden. So in order to get rid of that feeling, you have to take on additional responsibility in order to gain that love and appreciation, in order to feel like you're not a burden, right? If you're responsible for yourself, if you're responsible for all the people around you, then you're not a burden, you're helpful. And so that could be absolutely a thing. Also, they're often treated disrespectfully by parents and authority figures early on. So it gives you a distrust of authority, especially if you have Saturn at the end degrees in an inconjunct aspect. That usually indicates a distrust of authority figures in general. But with an inconjunct, that can make it a little bit more excessive and exacerbated. Usually the Saturn inconjunct aspects, you need to work for yourself because there is an indication that you take on too much burden. And especially if you have Saturn in conjunction in your 6th house or in your 10th house, one way of alleviating that burden is by working for yourself, so you only have your own burdens to carry, because that's going to be taking on too much of the burden of responsibility in your work life, or for your coworkers or in your career, those types of things. If you have a Saturn in conjunction in the 4th house, it'll be taking on too much of the burden and responsibility to care for your family, especially even later on in life. It could be that you feel obligated to take care of all of your parents' needs and things like that once they get old, and without getting any help from other people, and that could be very detrimental to you and to your health. And so you have to figure out where to draw the line. There could also be a lack of structure or family guidance, or some sort of limitation due to family tradition. So you could have lived in a family that was very authoritarian, very strict, very rigid, very traditional, and so you had really sort of severe boundaries imposed, or there could have been a lack of structure, a lack of boundaries, so it wasn't really known what was expected of you. So it felt like there were things that were being demanded of you. You felt like a burden, but you didn't really know what to do to rectify that situation. Okay. And so, oops. All right, so The challenges of the inconjunction in Saturn. So the challenge is to learn what responsibilities are your own to take on. To set appropriate boundaries, right? To cut cords when you need to cut cords, to let go and to let loose. Also, it can be really hard for Saturn inconjunction people to experience leisure time, pleasure, play. They feel like they constantly have to be working, or they have all these burdens, these responsibilities to take care of, and so it can be hard for them to let loose. So that's one of the things that I don't know if I put on here. Yeah, finding time to play. So loosening up and finding time to play. Life doesn't always have to be serious. Also finding the right timing. So moving with the energy when it's there, instead of trying to control the timing, instead of, feeling like you have to wait all the time, or feeling like you have to rush into things so you don't miss the mark. Just knowing that, divine timing is at play. Everything happens for a reason at the right time, and you are in alignment with the universe. As woo-woo as that sounds, it's something you have to learn to let go of. Also, setting appropriate standards and expectations for yourself and others is another challenge to deal with, because you can have high expectations for yourself and high standards for other people as well that are a little bit too high. You can't hold everyone to your standards because, especially with the Saturn inconjunction, you can have a lot of high standards for, being responsible and mature and all those things. And again, as I said, at the end degrees of Saturn, becoming your own authority, not submitting to other authority figures because you really don't trust them anyway. So this is better for working independently in general too. And again, if you have Saturn in an inconjunction in the 6th or in the 10th, or in an inconjunction with a planet in the 6th or in the 10th, or in the 2nd, those could be indications that it'd be better for you to work independently. And then latent talents. So this is, it imbues an inner strength and an ability to rely on your own resources, right? So it gives you a strong sense of internal responsibility. You hold yourself to a higher standard. You learn patience. You learn self-discipline. You learn to wait, right? You learn to find the right timing. This is really good for teaching, for leadership positions, to be in a position of authority, right? Because you need to be the authority figure, but this can only be the case if you learn not to take on other people's burdens, if you learn to delegate, if you learn to let people be responsible for themselves. And so we talked a little bit about some of these placements. I'm sorry that we're not going into every single one for all of these, but this would end up being like a 10-hour webinar if we did that. But if you have questions about specific placements, let me know. And so this one's an interesting one. So this is someone, and we're going to get into this more too when we get into the North and South Node, because this is a Saturn in conjunction to the North Node. And so this is a person who does have a tendency to take on too much baggage, too much burden of responsibility for other people in his life. He takes on too much, and he ended up getting a chronic illness, right? He had fibromyalgia, he had Lyme disease, all these different things. And with Saturn in retrograde in the 9th house, he was working in a corporate setting, and because he got so sick, he became interested in alternative medicine. And so what was very interesting about this one is that he went back to school. Saturn retrograde in the 9th house usually indicates, going back to school around the time of the Saturn return, right? You have to do it more than once, or you don't finish school the first time around, or something along those lines, or you start school later on in life, something along those lines. But a lot of times it indicates that you go back to school, especially around the Saturn return time period, and that's what he did. So he went back to school for chiropractic medicine, right? Capricorn rules chiropractic medicine. And so he has this in conjunction to the North Node, but it's also in alignment with the South Node as well by the semi-sextile, which has a similar energy to the in conjunction, but it has to be activated. It's not quite as prominent. And when you have it on this axis, it becomes more important. And so what he learned to do is to become a chiropractor, right? He learned to heal and take care of himself, and to heal and take care of other people, but he had to heal himself first. He had to take care of his own responsibilities, his own life, all these different things, and he had to learn appropriate boundaries. He had to learn to not take on all the burdens of all of his patients as well, because he was taking on too much burden for his family, for his friends, all these different things prior to that experience. And the North and South Node in the 10th and 4th house axis indicates that part of his path and part of his purpose is tied into his home and family, but in Capricorn, he feels more at home when he's at work, right? And then on this axis of the 4th and the 10th house, Again, feels more at home when he's at work. But whenever you have the north and south node on the 4th and 10th house axis, it usually indicates that you need, again, to work independently or work from home. So he started his own practice. And it's very close to his home, so he has his own office. And so that he essentially, this drew him into his destiny, because he is one of the most brilliant naturopathic doctors in the entire world. And, you know, it was very fated circumstances that led him on the path that he's on right now. And it's very much tied to his career, his success, his work. And so, yeah, so that experience where he was taking on these burdens, he ended up with a chronic illness, and then he ended up finding his true path in medicine, in alternative medicine. All right, and then this one, again, is, this is a client that I don't know that well, but I would assume that this person takes on too much of the burden and responsibility for her relationships, right? The people that she's in relationship with. Also for healing other people, right? Taking on the burden of responsibility for other people's wounds with Chiron there. This Chiron-Saturn conjunction can indicate that, especially in the inconjunct aspect. So taking on too much of the burden and responsibility when it comes to her relationships, not having appropriate boundaries, especially with Pisces being involved there, and also Saturn in conjunct Mars in the 2nd house, right? It could indicate that she gives too willingly when it comes to money, and she has to work really hard for her money and for her resources, but she's, you know, very easily swayed to take on financial responsibility for the people that she's in partnership with. That's what that would indicate. Also, this would indicate someone who might be a compulsive worker also. I would say that too. She might be like a workaholic. Okay. Uranus in conjunction. So how you guys doing in here? Oh, well, yeah. So Saturn in conjunct Neptune and Uranus, you would feel like a weirdo in groups. That is accurate. So we're going to get into Uranus, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Saturn in conjunction to the midheaven. Okay. We will get that. Actually, I do have an example, I think, of Saturn in conjunction to the midheaven that I can pull up too. So, okay. So Saturn in conjunction to the midheaven, before we get into the Uranus in conjunction, that can indicate, first off, it depends on where the in conjunction is. I think I remember the one that you're talking about in the 3rd house. But in general, Saturn in conjunction to the midheaven can indicate taking on too much of the burden of responsibility in terms of career, in terms of public reputation, in terms of, you know, your work life, your career life, those types of things. And so that's an indication that you should probably work independently. And when we get into the midheaven one, which I will get into, we can talk about that a little bit more. But in general, people who have in conjunctions to the midheaven, they tend to be very critical of authority figures, and they want other people to sort of adhere to their criticisms, and so they want to change things by like forcing other people to adapt their viewpoints when it comes to authority and tradition, because they usually have an aversion to those types of, to authority and tradition and all those types of things, and there's a focus on the past and the way things used to be. And especially with Saturn there, right? Saturn's very structured, it's very traditional, so there could be a focus on the past and the way things used to be in terms of the, you know, the way people express their energy out in the world, in their career and in their home life. But there's going to be some sort of opinion and sort of criticism toward those areas. But in general, taking on too much of the burden and responsibility. Also, you can be taking on too much of the burden for your family, because if it's in an inconjunct with your midheaven, it's going to be in a semi-sextile with your IC. And so that can absolutely indicate taking too much burden for your family and for your family members, for your home, for your property. Maybe even it's just that around the house you don't allow your family members or your husband or whoever it is to help you. And that can make it feel like a burden, right? So you're allowing other people to dump their burdens onto you. You're taking them as your own. So it's about setting appropriate boundaries in both those areas, and also appropriate boundaries in communication if this is in the 3rd house, which it might be. So that would indicate, you know, in communication, not letting people just spill out all their crap onto you, because that might happen. People might dump on you, right? You might meet people that you don't even know, and they might just unload all of their burdens onto you because they think that you're the person to carry them for whatever reason. And so learning to draw appropriate boundaries in communication is going to be important as well. Okay, so Uranus. So Uranus is strongest in aspect with a personal point and a cardinal, or a personal planet or a cardinal point. And so this is what I was talking about as we get into the transpersonal planets. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto particularly are only going to be super apparent if they're in an inconjunct with one of the planets that are Sun through Saturn. Yeah, so it's going to be more prominent if it's like one of the personal planets, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Those planets are going to be most prominent, and again, the cardinal points can be prominent as well, but really it's going to be more about the personal planets. So if you have a Uranus in conjunction to Pluto, that is a generational aspect, and so that's not going to really affect you on a personal level quite as much. So this indicates rebelliousness and independence is repressed or overexpressed. So it could be that you hold in your rebellious nature. You try not to rattle too many cages, especially if you have Uranus in conjunction with the Sun. Usually you're seeking approval from the outside, right? You're seeking approval from authority figures. And so you'd be more likely to conform, but you'd have this like innate, latent urge to rebel against the very people that you're trying to gain acceptance from, right? And so that's part of having Uranus in conjunction with the Sun. You know, when it comes to Jupiter, it's just sort of an overall general sense of rebelliousness that's either repressed or overexpressed, because there is a really deep need for freedom there. So there's a strong sense of individuality, but you're forced to conform, right? And most of us are forced to conform to one extent or another, but with Uranus in conjunctions, it can be especially difficult, especially on an internal level. There's usually an internal sense of anxiety or an unconscious rage that's bubbling below and beneath the surface that needs to come out, and that can be expressed passive-aggressively. It can be expressed sort of as a need and a desire to shock people. In order to make them change, in order to create social change, in order to get them to see things from a different perspective, all those types of things, or just to shake things up, right, just for the sake of creating change. And again, that's an expression of that internal sense of rage. But there's a strong sense of individuality. These people are paradigm busters. Even if you don't feel like you are because you're repressing your rebelliousness, you know that there's something in there. You feel a little bit different. So there's an innate feeling that you're different from other people in some sort of way, and you have something different and unique to give to the world. It can indicate that these people are unreliable or inconsistent. So even if you, well, I guess inconsistent is sort of similar to being unreliable, but you can be inconsistent in your work. If it's Uranus in conjunct to Saturn, or if it's Uranus in conjunction to Mars, you can be inconsistent in your actions. If it's Uranus in conjunction to Mercury, you can be inconsistent in your speech, your communication, your thoughts, your ideas. You can one day say one thing and the next day completely change your mind, those types of things. If it's with relationships, you can feel really pulled to create that balance, that really beautiful relationship. So if it's a Uranus in conjunction to Venus or to the descendant, it could really be, you know, inconsistency in relationships would be absolutely prevalent with you. And you could feel really pulled to having really long-lasting, really stable, really solid commitments, especially maybe if you have like Venus in Libra or something along those lines. Or if, you know, even if this is like Sun or Moon in Libra that we're talking about. But there's a pull toward having this balance in relationships, but also there's, when you have Uranus there, there's a fear of intimacy, a need for detachment. And there's a fear that your freedom is going to be restricted in relationships. And so it's going to cause you to do things that are disruptive, to shake things up, to shock people, the other people in your relationships, and it's going to, you know, cause issues for you. So that's going to make it very difficult to have a stable long-term relationship unless that relationship allows you for a really, really good amount of freedom, right? So these are the people that do better in long-distance relationships, or who do better in non-conventional relationships, even like, you know, polyamory or something like that, where you're keeping it fresh, keeping it exciting, where it's unusual in some sort of way, so it keeps your interest, so you don't feel like you're trapped, because that is the last thing that a Uranus in conjunction wants, is to feel trapped. Let's see. And so the anxiety, because this is someone who's prone to anxiety, especially when you have a Uranus in conjunction to Mercury, this can be someone who's very, very anxious, who just runs anxious. Uranus in conjunction to Mars can indicate that anxiety is masking an unconscious rage, right? So you're afraid of your own power, you're afraid of sort of exploding and going off the deep end, you're afraid of unleashing your true feelings about what's going on. Also, you know, Uranus in conjunction to the Moon, this is, you know, emotionally unsettling. This is, again, very anxious energy, but it can indicate that your emotions are just very, sort of erratic and inconsistent, right? So the planet that's on the opposite end of the spectrum of this in conjunction is going to give you a really good idea about Uranus and what it's doing, because Uranus, again, it's transpersonal. It's going to be a little bit more vague and a little bit more general, but you're really going to have to look at the personal planet that's involved. So when someone asks about what you look at first, you would look at the planet that's closest to the sun, right? That would be the planet that you would look at first. And then Uranus is how that planet is being sort of dysfunctional, right? Okay. So, Uranus in conjunctions in early childhood. So, anxiety in relationship to the father. It could be that the father was absent and you were just afraid that he was going to leave again, or you were afraid of punishment, or you're afraid of not being accepted or being rejected by the father, those types of things. Not always the father. If it is the son, I've seen that absolutely be the case, where the father rejects your lifestyle, your way of being. He rejects, everything about you. And so there's an anxiety about relating to the father, where if it's the son, you take on a certain role, right? But you feel really rebellious about it. So you'll break out during certain points of time and you'll do things that shock him. And then you'll kind of go back because you want to gain his acceptance again. Again, it doesn't always have to be the father, but that's part of it. Okay, so also this is, so life circumstances make it apparent that the child is different from other people. So you could just have this internal sense of being different from others, which we talked about. There's an impulse toward unreliable and inconsistent behavior, and so this stems from childhood experiences of restriction and limitation through domestication. So in the Psychodynamics of Inconjunctions by Alan Epstein, he describes this as the Uranian child is like a wild animal who resists being tamed, right? So it's like the parents are trying to domesticate you, but you feel like you need to be wild and free, so you could grow up in an environment that's overly restrictive, and so you feel the need to rebel. And so the challenges are resisting the urge to shock others into enlightenment. So doing things that are shocking and that are disturbing to other people just to sort of get them to see things your way, right? This can indicate that you have a very scientific, very abstract mind, but sometimes people can use other people as like tools for your speculation. So it's like experimenting with other people by doing different things to sort of rattle their cages to see what they're going to do next, right? It's that Uranus very voyeuristic approach to relationship, where you're trying to figure other people out in a way that's very scientific and detached. And especially that can be the case Uranus-Mercury in conjunction. That's not only a very anxious in conjunction, but it's highly, highly intelligent. If you have a Uranus-Mercury in conjunction, you're probably very smart, but very unusual in your thoughts and the way that you communicate them out in the world. And so people don't necessarily readily accept the information that you want to provide and convey to them because you're ahead of your time, right? And so that's part of the Uranus in conjunction to Mercury. And so people who have Uranus in conjunctions, they tend toward emotional detachment and they fear true intimacy, right? So that's definitely a thing with the Uranus in conjunction people. In any case with Uranus or with Aquarius, there's usually some sort of emotional detachment involved where you don't want people to really truly get to know you on a deep level. You want to put up this facade of being cool, calm, and collected. You can be very friendly, right? But friendly is different than intimate. Okay. And so these are, so the other challenge is to overcome the desire to create disruption and change just for the sake of disruption and change. The talents here, these are some of the most brilliant people, absolutely brilliant minds, very scientific, really good at coming up with new innovations, new inspirations. Their ideas are usually ahead of their time. They can have very inventive minds. Steve Jobs and Nikola Tesla are examples of Uranus in conjunction people. They have incredible creative abilities, and so sometimes people won't quite understand what it is that you're doing because, again, it can be ahead of its time. All right, and so we did that. What do we got going on here? So this is an example of a Uranus in conjunction to Venus. There's Pluto involved here too, so it's a little bit different. But Uranus in conjunction to Venus could be, again, even already there's a need for freedom in relationships, but this is going to be someone who really needs to maintain their freedom and independence on all levels, right? Especially in conjunction with the ascendant. So there's a need to be different. There's a need to shock people. There's a need to be unique. There's a need to be recognized for their individualism and their unique qualities, and for their scientific mind, for their intelligence, for their brilliance. All of those things as well they tie up their identity with their eccentricities, which is already a thing with the ascendant in conjunction, right? But with Uranus involved, their identity is very much tied into their uniqueness, their individuality, and the way that they show up as being eccentric, different, ahead of their time. They like to rattle people's cages, right? And they don't like to be tied down and pegged down in a relationship. This is someone who'd need a lot of freedom if they were to be in a relationship. Relationship makes them feel confined. Okay. How you guys doing here? Cool. Okay. Oops. Okay, guys. So we're almost through all of these. Kind of. Hopefully we can end by 5, but we'll see how this goes. So Neptune in conjunctions, the ability to think and act creatively, breaking down boundaries, and deep exploration are all ruled by Neptune. And so this is strongest, again, in aspect with personal planets and cardinal points. This represents someone who is prone to fantasy, illusion, daydreaming, delusion, and escapism. So this is someone who's this is going to be a dreamer. Somebody who is prone to daydreaming, who has difficulty concentrating and difficulty focusing, right? Difficulty focusing your attention on one thing, because your mind can be foggy and you could be prone to fantasizing and drifting off into la la land. There can be an inability to see things realistically, especially because these people can be deeply compassionate, deeply empathetic, and deeply loving. And so they see other people through the lens of rose-colored glasses. So you see what you want to see, and you don't necessarily see things for what they really are until it's a little bit too late, especially when Venus is in conjunction with Venus or with the descendant. That will be especially apparent in your relationships. There is an inner ambivalence, an uncertainty, and a self-doubt. So, there's a vague sense of ambivalence and uncertainty, like you're not quite sure of what you're supposed to be doing. And this, again, the context is going to depend on the other planet, because this is an outer planet. So, if this is your sun, right, that's in conjunction with Neptune, you're not ever sure if you're on the right path. There's like this uncertainty. Even when you're on the right path, you're ambivalent about it. You're not sure if you should really jump full force head into it. And you doubt yourself because there's a fogginess, there's a lack of clarity. There's an avoidance of obligations. Because, you just don't want to be obligated. Once you do become obligated to something, once an obligation is accepted, it's almost impossible for a Neptune in conjunction to let go of those obligations. So this again brings up boundary issues. So you need to learn appropriate boundaries and what obligations to take on and which ones to let go of and to not take on. And also these people are very sensitive to deception, especially when it's a Mercury in conjunction to Neptune. That can indicate that you are lied to or manipulated, that you're really sensitive to people who are lying to you. Also, you can be very prone to being deceived by other people when you have a Neptune in conjunction. So that is something to be aware of. So in early childhood, you could have been forced in childhood to forego desires or feign interest. So, you could have just been forced to do things that were boring and that you didn't really like, that you weren't interested in, but your parents made you pretend. Parents gave conflicting messages about expectations. This is especially the case with a Neptune in conjunction to the sun or to the moon, where you're not quite sure what your parents expect of you. And again, that ties in with fickle, uncertain parents, so you're not quite sure where they stand or where you stand with them. Responsibility and contribution were taken for granted by parents in childhood. In this way, this is very similar to the Jupiter in conjunction, and Jupiter and Neptune both rule Pisces, so it kind of makes sense, right? But there's an indication that when you take on responsibility, when you contribute, when you do things, that it's taken for granted, and that can continue on later in life as well. Parents demanded sympathy from others. So your parents might have martyred themselves or felt like they were the martyrs, right? They needed sympathy for for all these crosses they were carrying, those types of things. And so you learn to martyr yourself in return, because this is, Neptune is the planet of martyrdom. Pisces is the sign of the martyr. So it's about not martyring yourself for other people, and creating appropriate boundaries. So the challenge here is to dissolve rigid structures, because that's one of your talents, right? Is to dissolve structures that are too rigid, to dissolve, what we believe reality truly is, and to allow other people to see things below the veil, beyond the surface level. So challenge to dissolve rigid structures without succumbing to fantasy and escapism. So you have to learn to see things realistically, right? That's going to be a big major thing. Seeing things realistically can be difficult, and learning to accept obligation and to form healthy relationships, that's also another thing. Boundary issues, of course. And then a tendency to live in a fantasy world must be overcome, because you can be prone to fantasizing about things instead of actually doing them, especially when the inconjunction is between Neptune and Mars. Or if it's Neptune like in Aries, or in the first house or something along those lines. There is a tendency to dream and to fantasize about doing all this stuff and then to never actually do it. So you get the fulfillment through your fantasies instead of through reality. The latent talents, these are the mystics. Mysticism and awareness of realities beyond the physical realm. Deeply empathic, especially, Neptune in conjunction to the moon, deeply, deeply empathic, really good understanding of other people's emotions to the point where you can immerse yourself with other people's emotions. But again, good boundaries are required in order to utilize that talent without hurting yourself. Dissolver of egocentrism. Dreams, synchronicities, and mystical experiences provide guidance. That is very, very common with the Neptune in conjunction. There's a talent for poetry, photography, art, music, dance, film, etc., which we talked about before, and we're going to get into that same chart actually. With this Neptune yod here. We did break this down a little bit already, but I just want to bring up, because this is a person who has used a lot of those latent talents. She is very, very much guided by mysticism, by dreams, by symbols, by visions, right? She gets visions and downloads of things that that guide her in the right direction and show her what she needs to be doing, what action she needs to take. So that's where the certainty comes from with the Neptune inconjunct, is if you're following the guidance, if you're following the synchronicities, if you're following the signs, if you're following your dreams, if you're following these impressions, all of these things can help guide you in the right direction. And then, she is a photographer. She does multimedia. She does all these different things. She's a singer. She's a poet. All this, right? So she's utilizing the gifts and the talents of the Neptune in conjunction. And even when she is on the right path and she's certain of it, she becomes ambivalent and uncertain from time to time, because she can't quite see things so clearly. She can't see what she's supposed to be doing as clearly as she might be able to otherwise. And so, there's a need for certainty, obviously, with Pluto in the in conjunction as well, which we'll get into in this next one. All right. Pluto in conjunctions. All right, so Pluto in conjunctions, we talked a little bit about along the way. These ones I think are very interesting. A lot of people who, as I mentioned before, who are interested in astrology, psychology, divination, tarot, a lot of you guys are going to have Pluto in conjunctions. And so what this brings is a need for certainty. You need to know what's going to happen next, right? That's part of the Pluto inconjunct aspect, and a lot of that is because in childhood you had a lot of uncertainty, or maybe you had a parent that was aggressive toward you, or who was very intense. You were encountering intense situations in your early childhood experience that cause you to need to figure people out and navigate and to realize their motivations, right? You're always trying to be one step ahead of the game. And so there is an intense need for certainty and control. There's a fear of change and uncertainty, and so especially at the beginning, it can be very difficult for Pluto in conjunct people to deal with change and deal with letting go, right? So they might vacillate between holding on too tightly and surrendering far too much. So it's all or nothing with Pluto in general. It's a planet of extremes, but these people will either hold on really tightly to the way things are, or they'll just let everything go, and it's just like, let it all burn, right? There's no in between. You can't just hold on to the good stuff and let the bad stuff surrender and be let go of, right? You have to let it all go. You have to burn it all down, that kind of thing. That's sort of the mentality there. But usually there is a fear of change and a fear of uncertainty. So what goes on is that you're always trying to figure out what's going to happen next. You're always trying to plan and to plot and to control everything that's going on in your surroundings. And eventually you learn that you can't do that. And usually when there's a major long-term transit to Pluto, that's when that happens. And so, you know, that's something in my experience having a Pluto inconjunct on my ascendant. When I had Saturn hit my Pluto inconjunction, my entire life was turned upside down. I had to let go of everything that I had thought that I was, my identity, right, with my ascendant being involved there. It was like my whole life changed all at once, and I really had to let go of everything. And I really fought it. I fought it really hard. But, you know, after that experience, after Saturn spent, you know, a couple years forcing my hand and forcing me to deal with letting go and to deal with change, it became much easier. You know, I still want to take calculated risks, and I still want to figure out what's going on as it's going on, and I'm still working on that. But there's a need to let go of the need for certainty, for sure. And also, so they might, there's a constant need to figure people out, which is why these people are interested in categorizing people, right? Through psychology or through astrology or through the Myers-Briggs or whatever else. They can be obsessed with putting people in these little categories so they can place them, right? They know who they are. They can figure them out. And they can also become manipulative or attract people who are manipulative, and they can vacillate between the two. So maybe early on you were a little bit manipulative in your early childhood with your parents, or in, you know, early adulthood or something like that, and then you change when you have an important transit to Pluto. And then after you change, you have other people that you attract that are manipulative and that are very vampiric. So if you're not engaging in that energy yourself, then you attract people who are manipulative. But once you learn to utilize and work with this energy a little bit more effectively, because you are so discerning and you can really see through people, this is one of the most highly analytical, you can just really see to the truth, see to the core of what's going on. You can notice the subtle nuances in people's behavior, to discover their hidden motivations. You can really detect when people are lying to you for the most part, but sometimes you know it and you let it happen anyway, right? That's part of the Pluto inconjunction. So you have to learn to be more discerning and to cut it off before it gets too late, when you are dealing with people who are manipulative. Okay, so Pluto inconjunctions in early childhood, these ones are sort of interesting. One of the things that Ellen Epstein says is that sometimes there's premature or severe, quote unquote, toilet training. So you could be excessively punished for, you know, not, you know, toilet training properly, or rewarded excessively. And as, you know, embarrassing as this is, I was rewarded with a swing set for toilet training when I was a child. So, and I have a Pluto inconjunction, so I felt like this might be accurate, right? I don't know how this relates. This is very Freudian, but you know, Pluto rules elimination and the processes of elimination in the body, so it kind of makes sense. Also, intense experiences in the early childhood environment are prevalent, or it could have just been that a lot of emotional intensity and psychic energy were directed toward you, or you were manipulated, or you had parents who were manipulated, those types of things. Parents might have been manipulative or viewed as weak. That is the wrong spelling of weak. I apologize for that. Or you could have had obsessive or clingy parents, so parents that obsessed over you or that were very clingy, that didn't let you live your own life. And again, you know, the context of this and what's really going on is going to depend on the planet on the opposite end, because Pluto is an outer planet. So the challenge is learning to live with uncertainty as a fact of life, learning to surrender, right? Learning to enjoy change and spontaneity can be difficult too, because sometimes people with Pluto inconjuncts, they can hold on to the needs for certainty so much so that they're planning and plotting everything, and then they can lose that joy, that spontaneity, that ability to be surprised. You know, a lot of times people with Pluto inconjunctions, they don't really like surprises, even when they're positive surprises. And so learning to let go of that, right? Learning to enjoy spontaneity, learning to enjoy surprises, especially when they're positive ones, right? Just because it's different than what you thought it was going to be doesn't mean it's bad. Sometimes it's good. Also forgoing the need for correctness, because Pluto inconjunction people, especially if it's like a Pluto inconjunction to Mercury or one of the personal planets, you need to know that you're correct before you do something, and there's a need to know that the next move you're going to make is the right move. And that's why a lot of people who come to me for astrology readings are, you know, Pluto inconjunction people. They just want to know that they're doing the right thing and that what they're doing is in alignment with what the universe has in store for them and has decided for them, or whatever it is, right? They want to know that they're in alignment with the energy as it unfolds. So it gives them a sense of certainty, and it gives them a sense of relief, like, okay, well, I know that this is what it's supposed to be, so it's okay that right now things are turbulent and crazy and chaotic. And especially when there's turbulence, that's when Pluto inconjunct people tend to hold on really tightly to the past and to you know, what already was, or in what needs to be let go of. And that's when people suffer too with Pluto transits and Pluto inconjunctions. You suffer when you try to hold on and it's you know, it's past its expiration date. So the latent talents, deeply perceptive, able to see right through people. That is definitely a talent. A really deep understanding of people's psychology, being able to figure out those subtle nuances in people's behavior, reading between the lines. Those are all talents. They're not even latent in the Pluto inconjunct people, really. I wouldn't call it a latent talent. They are really perceptive in that way because they learned that they needed to be for whatever reason. There's a talent for psychology, understanding the hidden motivation of other people, psychic abilities, interest in divination, astrology, tarot, the occult, and an ability to effectively deal with intense situations. So if there is an intense situation going on, they're able to handle intensity much more so than other people because they know how to like manage these situations, right? Because they've spent their life trying to manage and control these situations. So they know how to deal with the energy a little bit more effectively once they've worked through it and they're able to move with the energy instead of trying to like hold it in place. And so I'm going to go back to this one. So again, this is the Pluto inconjunct to the moon. This is someone who definitely has a need for certainty. She's very deeply psychic. She can read people absolutely so clearly, clearer than anyone that I've ever known. She's really able to tap into people's hidden motivations and bring it out and draw it up into the right up here in the midheaven, right? Bring it out into the open so that way she can show it to other people. She's very deeply perceptive, this person, and also very intense, right? And able to deal with that intensity. And so, you know, that's just a little thing about the Pluto inconjunct aspect. Let's see. This one is an interesting one because this involves the midheaven and the IC, which we'll talk about. But this one is a need. This one is actually my husband's birth chart, and so he has Pluto in conjunction with the IC, and because he's had a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of very chaotic and intense experiences, especially in early childhood, he has had issues with uncertainty involving the home and the family, and also, you know, his career and his public reputation. And so, you know, there's a need for certainty when it comes to whatever the next move is with his career, and there's a need for certainty when it comes to his family, and that his roots are going to be there, right, and that it's not going to all fall out from underneath then. And so when things get chaotic, when things change, you know, he holds on a little bit tightly, or he's always trying to figure out what comes next, like where are we going to move next? What's the house going to be like? What are the next steps to take? And it's very specific only to the home and the family and to his career. He's not like this in any other way. He's very, you know, Sagittarian. He's going with the flow. He's adventurous. He's willing to take risks, all of these things. But when it comes to his family life, he wants to know for sure what the right thing is to do. And so that's very much a Pluto inconjunct aspect trait, and especially with the IC, right? The IC rules the home and the family. All right, let's see. Let's take a break and see what you guys are saying. Oh, there I am. And Saturn inconjunct the ascendant. I'm looking all rosy. I know, I'm getting tired from talking so much. I've been talking for 3.5 hours now. Let's see. When you look at the houses and signs, you also look at the rulers. You can, yeah, if you want to get that in-depth into it. I would mostly look at what planet is in the opposite end of the inconjunct. That's going to be the first and foremost primary importance. And then to give it context, you want to look at the house positions. You want to look at the sign that it's in, all of those different things. But really the main thing is the 2 planets that are in aspect, because that's going to give you a ton of information. Even if you don't have any context for it, it's going to give you a good amount of information because it tells you what's going on deeply on this psychological level. Let's see. So, Saturn inconjunct the ascendant. We're about to talk about the ascendant and descendant, Maria, so I can use that as an example then. Okay, so I'm going to get back into this. All right, guys, we're almost done. Getting my second wind. All right, so we're back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so in conjunctions to the lunar nodes, this is going to be a short little part of the presentation because there's not a lot of information on this. I have only seen this through personal experience, working with people and working with clients, but they do take on a faded importance. Usually the dealing with the inconjunction and the planet that's in the inconjunction to the north or south node, like the example I gave with the doctor who had Saturn in an inconjunction with his north node, dealing with the inconjunction and resolving that helps you to move forward into the path and into the purpose that you were really meant to be on in this lifetime. And it takes on a fated importance, and it's very tied in and connected with the energy of the nodes, which the nodes represent the path that you're headed into in this lifetime, which is the north node, and what you've already mastered in previous lifetimes and what you need to surrender and let go of, and that is the south node. So the energy of the inconjunct in dealing with these psychological patterns can help you deal with these energies and move through them a little bit more easily. And so inconjunct aspects brought on by the aspecting planet aim to pull the person into your path in this lifetime. And every time that this planet is transited, you're going to be sort of pulled into a new path or pulled into a different path, or you're going to be pulled more deeply into the path that you were pulled into during your initially with this aspect. And then the inconjunct to the south node indicates the need to surrender old attachments in order to resolve the challenges of the inconjunction. So I gave these examples. I'm going to give them again, just because these are the ones that we were talking about. So the Saturn in conjunction to the south node here, it pulled him into his path, right? Dealing with resolving the patterns of Saturn and letting go of loose boundaries, those types of things. All right, so then we also have this one, which we talked about, which was the Mercury in conjunction to the south node. And there's a need here to surrender, the need to, a need to surrender identifying with your own self-image, your own self-interest, right, in favor of dealing with relationship and, immersing yourself in relationship, but still maintaining your freedom, right, because you have Aquarius there on the descendant, so that's part of it as well. And then also tying your identity to, because anytime you have an inconjunction near the ascendant, you're going to be tying your identity up way too much with the planet that's in the inconjunction. So this is going to be tying your identity in with your intellect, right? With your mind, with your ability to communicate, with your intelligence, all those types of things. So there's a need to surrender this, though. There's a need to let go. There's a need to let go of old energies, let go of the past, to surrender things that you're holding on to surrender this attachment to your identity in the world, and to surrender focusing so much on who you are and what you're projecting and how people are perceiving you, and focusing more on the descendant, which is going to be, forming close bonds and relationships, that type of thing. But so this Mercury is part of it, right? Because a lot of the identity is tied up in that area. So this is a little bit complex because it is involving the ascendant as well. Let's see. And so we'll get into the ascendant and the descendant. So the ascendant. So someone asked about Saturn in conjunction to the ascendant. So the planet on the ascendant, again, you over-identify with the eccentricities or the sort of dysfunctional energy of the planet that's in influence of the ascendant. So Saturn in conjunction to the ascendant, you over-identify with this sense of responsibility, this need to be respected, this need to be seen as mature and responsible and reliable. And so because this is so much a part of your identity, and that you take on all these burdens, also you can be over-identifying with the fact that you take on all these burdens for other people, right? And you're bogged down by all these burdens. You always feel burdened, you always feel limited, and so you over-identify with this planetary energy. And so this can make it a little bit more difficult to let go of these patterns when you do have a planet that's in conjunction with the ascendant. It makes it much more difficult to resolve the planetary energy because it's so tied in with your identity, and you it's the image that you portray, the image that you project, and it's become so much a part of yourself that it becomes a little bit difficult to let go of. A little bit more so than the other planets. But so with Saturn, it's identifying too much with this need to take on so much responsibility. And so the planet in aspect affects how the person presents himself or herself, or how he sees himself or herself. So it affects the way that you see yourself, essentially. It also affects the way that other people see you and perceive you. So even if your ascendant is in like Leo, and you have Saturn in conjunction with your ascendant, you're going to identify a lot with that very Capricornian, very mature, very responsible energy, and you're going to identify with this need to always be bogged down by all these responsibilities and taking on so much responsibility. And that could be, and that's going to come across too, so people are going to perceive you in this way. They're not going to necessarily always see you as this fun-loving, like Leo, showy, dramatic, passionate type of person. You're also going to have this Saturnian aspect to you that you're identifying with. Also, you can feel misunderstood because, that's part of having the in conjunction to the ascendant. So a feeling of being misunderstood because, again, especially because of the identification with this energy that is not a part of your ascendant, but you make it a part of your ascendant. So the obsessive behavior, so that could be part of it. Also over-identifying with we talked about that, sorry. Awkwardness or discomfort with your identity, that can be another thing that shows up when you have an in conjunction to the ascendant. With the descendant, the planet in the aspect affects the person's experience in relationships. So it affects, interpersonal relationships. It causes issues. It reveals the qualities that one will be drawn to in a potential partner. It also interferes with intimacy in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it can bring really strong opinions about parenthood, either really rigid in wanting children or really rigid in not wanting children. And then you attract a partner who wants the exact opposite. And so that partner will feel like they're sort of bogged down or tied down or burdened by these children that they didn't want. Or you could feel like you had to cave, right? And you didn't have children, so you can feel unfulfilled. So there's a resentment that is harbored with this energy if that is the case. And this is more so the case if the moon is in the 7th house, or if there is like the 7th house cusp is in Leo or in Cancer. That can absolutely be the case. Sometimes people will get married or, be in relationship just to have children, even though the other partner doesn't necessarily, they're not quite as on board as, maybe you would want them to be. So that is absolutely something that can show up for people who have in conjunctions to the descendant. And so in early childhood, the ascendant in early childhood in an in conjunction, you can feel misunderstood. It's a generational dysfunction that is passed down a lot of the times. So you'll see that you'll be taking on these dysfunctional patterns of the parents. So the parents project their unresolved issues onto you, and especially unresolved issues involving sibling rivalry onto the child, which I thought is interesting because that was my experience as well, with my father and my in conjunction to my ascendant, where he was the youngest and he felt like he was always getting all the blame and getting the short end of the stick. And so it seemed like he was favoring my younger sister. I know that's not the case, but he projected all of his anger toward his older siblings onto me. And so that was kind of one of the things that would come up. But so parents can project unresolved sibling rivalry onto the child, which I thought that was really interesting because this is from the psychodynamics of inconjunctions. And that was kind of accurate. And then, so descendant, child could have felt disturbed by parents' attitude, the behavior toward grandparents and authority figures. So it could have been that they mistreated their grandparents, or they sort of over-glorified them or something, but in some sort of way the child felt like it was odd or it wasn't correct. So a lot of times it is that the parent disrespected authority figures. Generational dysfunction, again, that is passed down. That's true for both the ascendant and descendant. So whatever issues that come up through the ascendant and descendant. And again, the planet that's in conjunction is going to be the most important thing to look at when you're looking at an in conjunction to the ascendant or the descendant. Parents exhibited sexual repression or awkwardness around sexuality, and that could be the case. So you sort of get this awkwardness around relationship or around love, sexuality, expressing your love for your partner, PDA, those types of things. And then sometimes it brings a general underlying discontent with all relationships. So, in conjunctions to the descendant can be a little rough on your relationships. Okay, and so we talked about the in conjunction here, which is Venus on the ascendant. So it was an over-identification with looks, with appearance, all those types of things. And also, with this Venusian, very sensual energy too, that is something that she very much embodied and still embodies. So that's part of that as well. So there's an over-identification with this energy of Venus on the ascendant. Even though she is a Sagittarius rising, she has this Venusian quality that comes across very much so. Let's see. This is with the descendant, so we talked about. Also, so if you have Mars, in conjunct the descendant, this could be misplaced rage, where you're placing your rage onto your partner. You are acting out or acting aggressively to your partner. This is someone who could be violent in relationships or who could attract violence in relationships, one or the other. But this indicates misplaced rage that's directed toward a partner, and it's not always warranted. So inconjunctions to the midheaven and the IC. So planets in aspect indicate the nature and the context of this influence. And so, like I talked about with Pluto and the inconjunction on the chart that we looked at, it was a Pluto inconjunction to the IC. It indicates, a need for certainty, right? So you need to look at the planet that's involved in this. But it indicates inner turmoil and frustration, internalized resentment, ambivalence toward authority figures and established tradition, which we talked about. And a potential conflict between a career and family life. That's a big thing with the inconjunction to the midheaven and the IC. Because of your early childhood experience, maybe you had a mother or a father who felt that they had to sacrifice family for career or career for family. So you feel like you can't have both. You can't have both worlds because you saw that you had a parent that sacrificed a lot for one or the other. And so it can be very difficult for you to envision a world where you can have it all when it comes to your career and you can still have a family, or you can have a really solid family life and still have some sort of career. So you have to sort of learn to rectify that situation because there's a desire to have that balance. There really is. But you feel like it's not even a thing that you can have. It can also manifest as a rebelliousness against authority. That is absolutely a thing, a distrust of authority. Indecisiveness or rigidity in decision-making, that can be a thing too, especially when it comes to your career and your family situation, your home, your property. You might constantly be trying to figure out where you want to live, what kind of house you want to have, what you need in terms of your family. If you even want to have a family, that could be a thing too. Also, with your career, you could constantly feel a little bit indecisive or ambivalent toward the career path that you've chosen, not knowing if it's the right thing, not knowing if it's the right direction, that type of thing. There can be an over-concern with privacy or violating the privacy of others. That is, both of these charts I'm going to show you have that, the chart that I showed you of my husband, he's very concerned with privacy. He didn't have a smartphone for a very long time. He puts tape on the camera on his on his MacBook. He's very concerned with privacy and the abuse of authority, right? Which is a real thing. It's a very valid concern. But he's more concerned with it than most people would be, and so is this other person I'm going to show you. And also violating the privacy of others. So this, sometimes people who have inconjunctions to the midheaven and the IC, they can go through your phone, go through your private stuff, and they feel like it's okay to do that because maybe their mom went through their diary when they were a kid or something, or they could be over concerned with privacy because their mom went through their diary in childhood. But there's some sort of issues around privacy and needing privacy, but also sometimes they can violate the privacy of other people. A strong desire to confront established authorities, to force others to take his or her criticisms into consideration. That is, yeah. I feel like that one's self-explanatory, so I'm going to leave with that. Okay, so these inconjunctions in early childhood, again, you really need to look at the planets involved. That's going to be predominant, but this is going to give you an idea of what's going on. So in early childhood, the child feels resentment over being forced to make unfair compromises. The parent may have had to sacrifice his family connection in favor of career aspirations or vice versa. And again, they may have had very little privacy in childhood, or the parent was over concerned with privacy and they like locked their bedroom and they weren't allowed to go in there and they were just very secretive, right? And so we talked about this one with Pluto and the inconjunction to the IC. And then in this one, there's actually Neptune in an inconjunction with the midheaven. And so this person is very sensitive to deception in particular. He thinks that authority figures are always lying, deceiving, manipulating. He's concerned with seeing through the veils, seeing through the lies, seeing through the illusions that are being projected out into the world by these authority figures, right? And also there is a big over-concern with, I wouldn't even say over-concern because I do think that these things are important, but there's a major concern with privacy that this person has, where he thinks that, where he realizes that everything that we're saying, everything that we're doing is being, recorded and looked at, and we don't have any privacy anymore, and that he feels violated by that very much so. And so it has a lot to do with deception. This is an external planet, but it is with the midheaven, and so there's a lot of sensitivity to deception by the government, by the powers that be, looking at manipulation, looking at like false flag events, looking at the ways that we're being deceived. Okay. All right, guys, how we doing? We're almost done. Okay. All right, guys, so I'm going to go over the yod briefly, and then I'm going to talk about transits and how they activate the yod and the inconjunctions, and then we are finished. So thank you all for sticking with me, the ones that have. I know we lost some people, but this is very long. You can always, you know, the link that you have is going to link to the recording as well, so you can go back and watch and rewatch and, you know, pick and choose what you want to look for. Maybe when I have time, I can go and do timestamps and put them in the description, but right now that's probably not going to happen. All right, so let's get into the yod aspect, and if you guys have any questions, again, feel free to raise your hand, let me know. All right. All right, so the yod, which we spoke about briefly, but the yod is also known as the finger of God. So this is a very important aspect that takes on a very fated significance. And so this is indicated by two inconjunctions and a sextile that form a triangle pointing at the apex planet. If the yod is pointed to the singleton in the bucket chart, this energy is more likely to be repressed and must be utilized. We talked about the bucket chart at the very, very beginning. So if you missed that part, go back, look at it, and you can, you know, figure out if that's something that you have, because this is an energy that takes on even more importance. The tendency can be to lean on the sextile planets until the apex planet is activated. So these two planets in sextile down here. So in this example, it is a Sun, Saturn sextile, and they're forming a yod with the moon up here in Scorpio. And so there's a need to engage with emotional intensity and to express your emotions fully and deeply and to connect very passionately on an emotional level with other people. There's a really deep and profound emotional intelligence when you have this moon, even though, you know, it's at its fall or detriment in Scorpio. It's still there's still a deep and intense emotional connection involved with the moon and Scorpio. Moon and Scorpio people can be deeply psychic, deeply they can just have a deep sense of understanding when it comes to other people's emotions. They're really, and they feel a lot of really intense emotion beneath the surface, but they don't let it out, right? And so someone who has a yod like this is probably not connecting to their emotions. There's a lot of turbulence bubbling up beneath the surface that'll come out at times that are inappropriate, and they'll just come out all at once. They'll just spill over. But for the most part, for most of their lives, it's going to be repressed, right? When you have the yod, the apex is usually repressed. And so there's a tendency to lean on the sextile planets, so that they're leaning on the things that are very physical, very tangible, leaning on markers of success, markers of responsibility, markers of authority, and they're leaning on their work, right? They're leaning on things that are very physical and very tangible. When you have the sun in Aries, which is a very physical sign, and you have Saturn in Gemini, so they're leaning on things that are mental too. They're leaning on busyness, day-to-day activities, day-to-day responsibilities, all of those types of things. So they're leaning on this energy, but really they're leaning on the sextile between Saturn and the sun, which is an indication of being very responsible, working really hard towards success, all of those types of things. And so they're not focusing on what's going on beneath the surface, this psychic, this emotional, this intuitive energy of this moon in Scorpio. And so what happens is this planet becomes activated, the apex planet, which in this case would be the moon in Scorpio. And it becomes activated by long-term transit. It can be activated a little bit here and there by major long-term transits, but there's usually a point in life where you're sort of forced, right? You've been given so many chances to deal with this inconjunct planet, and you're sort of forced to embody that energy. And so once that planet is activated, it takes over the chart, right? It takes over your personality. It becomes who you are, and you wonder why you've been avoiding it all this time. So you can, that's when it becomes a little overexpressed, is when you first tap into this energy finally and fully and truly. And so transits to inconjunct planets, so they activate the dysfunctional energy of the inconjunction and force us to address the issues. And they do that in a number of different ways. The long-term transits are going to be the most powerful, and they're going to bring us back into a greater balance through whatever the energy of the planet that's in transit will do. My example before was Saturn hitting my ascendant and hitting my Pluto, and that forced me to deal with uncertainty because I had to go through a lot of loss and a lot of turbulence, a lot of upheaval. You know, so then I had to let go. I couldn't control everything because nothing was in my control during that point in time. Another example would be, you know, if you have a yod like we just saw with the moon in Scorpio there, Uranus, if Uranus came into a long-term transit with the moon, you'd have to deal with a lot of really emotionally turbulent, a lot of chaotic situations, a lot of change. Your emotions would be all over the place, right? So you'd have to deal with them. You'd have to look at them because it would be impossible to ignore at that point because you're having such a turbulent and chaotic and frustrating emotional experience below the surface. So it's going to come out one way or another. So the long-term planetary aspects can help us to work through our issues and to bring us face-to-face with hidden talents that have otherwise been inaccessible. Major long-term transits to the apex of a yod can be life-changing. The repressed apex planet becomes predominant. So we talked about that a little bit as well. All right, guys. So it is 4 hours in. How are you guys doing? Okay, so I am going to go back on here. All right, you guys. So thank you so much for watching this and for signing up for my webinar. If you are watching live, if you have any questions, feel free to message me, email me, whatever it is. And okay, so cool. So I think we're pretty much good for now. We went through a lot of information. We could have gone into even more information than this, but I don't think I can talk for any longer. So thank you all so much for joining me. And again, if you want to book a reading with me within 10 days of this webinar, you can do so at the link I'm going to post in the description below. So you're going to get an extra 10 minutes with me if you book a 30 or 60-minute reading, or you'll get a free single question reading to redeem at any time if you book a 90-minute reading with me, and that is if you book within 10 days of this webinar, and that goes for if you're watching it live or if you've purchased it and you're watching it after the fact as the recording. So thank you so much again for being here. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. As exhausting as this was, it was very fun, and I was very happy to be able to present this information to you. So again, email me, message me with questions if you have any, and I hope you have a wonderful, beautiful Saturday. Bye, everyone.